Jon Snow stood upon the ancient stones of the wall, the chill wind coursing across the battlements and biting at every patch of exposed flesh. The once familiar cold felt sharper tonight. There was no longer a looming threat of white-eyed wights or the deathly presence of White Walkers. It was a curious kind of stillness that followed the end of one war, like standing in the aftermath of a storm, uncertain whether the calm was real or merely a precursor to another cataclysm. He peered north toward the endless expanse of land where the free folk roamed and built their camps, and he felt in his bones that some new fate called to him from those icy plains. Memories of the long night haunted him, of course, the terror shared by all the living, the clash of desperate armies on the frosty fields outside Winterfell, the bitter final stand that had toppled an ancient evil. Yet now, after surviving so many horrors, he found himself at the edge of a new turning. He was, by the decree of those who had reshaped the realm, banished to the wall once again, as if the entire sum of his life could be reduced to that single bleak structure. But fate and duty were only half the story. Jon had never been one to ignore the pull of his heart. In his dreams, he saw faces Sansa, Arya, Bran, reminding him of how far he'd come and how much he had lost. Whenever he woke, there was no Red Keep, no feasting hall in Winterfell, no warm bed or easy laughter. Only the wall and the north beyond. He had watched Tormund Giantsbane, that big, hardy man with flame-red hair, stride away into the wild. Jon felt drawn to follow, and so he did, departing Castle Black with Ghost at his side. The old duties binding him to the Night's Watch had lost their sting. There were no more White Walkers to guard against. There was only a new dawn shining on the horizon, one where the free folk, for whom he had once sacrificed his life, might truly be free. The land beyond the wall was harsh and sparsely populated, but it glimmered with possibilities. Having spent so many years torn between allegiances, House Stark, the Night's Watch, the Iron Throne, his vow to help the living, Jon was ready for something else. Something new yet old as well, the dream of unity he had clung to. He found Tormund and the others sheltering in a cluster of pine trees, crouched around a modest fire. The curly-haired leader gave Jon a quick, fierce grin when he arrived. There was still sadness in Tormund's eyes. How could there not be, after all they had lost? But the man's spirit never failed to spark. He greeted Jon with a wordless clasp of arms, warmth coursing between them despite the frozen surroundings. Over the crackling flames, Tormund grumbled about the scarcity of game that winter, though a freshly caught rabbit roasted on a spit. Jon almost smiled at the recollection of simpler troubles. Starvation felt almost mundane compared to ice demons and dragons. Yet if the free folk were hungry, that meant children without proper nourishment, families at risk. It was a gnawing problem that reminded him, even in peace, survival was no easy matter in these lands. In the quiet after their greeting, Tormund voiced something that had weighed on Jon's mind for weeks. "You belong with us," he said simply. His blue eyes flicked northward toward the wide tundra that seemed to swallow the horizon. "The free folk know you. We know what you've done. There's respect for you here. But you'll have to find it in your heart to lead us. No one else can do it." Jon listened in silence. The old weight of leadership pressed upon him again. He thought of the many times he'd been declared a leader, Lord Commander, King in the North, even a Targaryen heir, though that part had never felt truly his. Each time it had come with monumental cost. But Tormund was right. Someone had to ensure the free folk's survival. Someone had to speak for them and guide them in a realm that had never truly accepted them. Maybe, just maybe, he could help. The notion lit a small fire of hope in Jon's chest. He nodded quietly, accepting the weight of Tormund's words. In the days that followed, Jon traveled among the various tribes beyond the wall. With Ghost padding silently at his side, he visited encampments spread across snowy hills and frosted valleys. He met with elders wrapped in thick furs, their eyes full of questions and quiet reverence. He listened to mothers who pleaded for safer ways to feed their children, to healers who needed supplies, to warriors who desired to reclaim lost hunting grounds. Despite the many scarred hearts, they recognized Jon for who he was, not a southern lord, not a stranger, but the man who had proven his loyalty on the battlefield, who had once died and come back, who had bent the knee to save them all and had shattered the chains of prejudice that separated the free folk from the men of the Seven Kingdoms. Stories of the war against the dead had spread. Some of the younger men and women regarded Jon with awe, calling him the man who wrestled with death itself. Jon brushed off the praise whenever possible. In truth, the ravages of that war had weighed on him. The burden of victory was sometimes heavier than defeat, for it carried the ghosts of the fallen along with it. But there was also a spark of warmth in seeing these people alive, with families and hopes. He told Tormund quietly that he was prepared to do all he could to unify them, to see them thrive. Tormund only grinned and nodded. "We knew you'd come around," the big man said. And so it began. Winter started to recede, glacially slow, but enough that the crisp air softened in the afternoons, the nights less vicious in their cold. Under a sky that was still tinted the faintest pink at dusk, Jon and Tormund gathered the free folk for a kind of council. They brought the scattered tribes to a great clearing in the forest beyond the wall, near where a narrow river wound southward, eventually finding its course through the Gift and into the outskirts of the north. There, they built massive bonfires to fight off the night's chill and give the entire gathering a feeling of ancient significance. Men and women milled around, smelling of musk and wood smoke, their furs battered from days of travel. Some came armed with spears and axes, as was their custom. The children stayed close to their families, wide-eyed and watchful. Jon stood in the center of the clearing, Tormund and a few other respected elders at his side, their faces made ruddy by the firelight. A hush fell over the crowd as if they expected some mighty proclamation. In truth, Jon was rarely a man of many words, but he had learned to speak from the heart. He gazed around at these faces, some he recognized from the fight at Harholm, others from the march on Winterfell, many knew. Each carried lines of hardship, of survival. Each was connected by an unbreakable bond to the land and to one another. He began by speaking of unity. He told them how the free folk had always been called wildlings by the people south of the wall, cast as savage and irredeemable. He spoke of how that was a lie, a fear-driven ignorance. When the dead had come, the free folk had bled and died alongside the northerners. No one could question their bravery, their devotion. He said that if they stayed scattered, they would always be easy prey for any new threat or for the cunning lords of the south who might one day see them as enemies again. But together, truly together, they could build something that was theirs. Something that no king or queen in the south could tear apart. His words were met by murmurs at first. Then Tormund stepped forward and recounted in his loud, boisterous style the many times Jon Snow had saved the free folk from doom. He even made jests at Jon's expense, calling him a brooding crow who refused to stay dead and calling attention to his meager skills at making love to a woman, which drew uproarious laughter. But beneath the teasing, Tormund told them that Jon Snow was the only man who had the respect of both the free folk and the northerners. He said that if anyone could bring them together as one people, it was Jon, son of the great Ned Stark, who had a bit of the old First Men's blood in his veins. That struck a chord. Some brandished their weapons in support. A cry rose up around the circle. It was wordless, but it carried a fierce, visceral energy. They wanted something to believe in after the horrors they had lived through. Jon Snow, in all his reluctant magnetism, was that figure. But uniting the free folk was only half of the problem. There was another realm just south of them, the north, where Jon's Stark heritage lay. Sansa held dominion there, having been crowned queen in the north after the wars. She had labored to rebuild Winterfell and the entire territory. The people were proud and loyal to her. She was everything the daughter of Ned Stark should be, wise, pragmatic, and fiercely protective. Jon knew that forging a bond between the free folk and the north would require the blessing of Sansa. Yet, in a sense, it felt like bridging two different worlds, separated not just by geography, but centuries of distrust. The next step was inevitable. With Tormund and a company of trusted free folk warriors, Jon set off for Winterfell. Traveling through the Gift, they found the old farmland in disrepair. The war had decimated much, and though Sansa had done her best to feed her people, the land bore the scars of a harsh winter. Abandoned homesteads, toppled barns, blackened fields from old battles. Yet the closer they drew to Winterfell, the more signs of renewed life they saw: wheat struggling to grow in the warmed soil, shepherds regathering flocks of skinny sheep, small folk rebuilding huts with new timbers. It was a testament to northern resilience. When they arrived at Winterfell's gates, the guards stiffened at the sight of a band of free folk, but recognition sparked in their eyes when they saw Jon. A ripple of astonishment spread through them. Jon Snow, who had gone beyond the wall, was back. The gates swung open, and they entered, greeted by the courtyard that Jon had grown up in, though it looked different. Repairs had made the walls sturdier, and fresh banners fluttered from the ramparts, House Stark's direwolf, done in new cloth, bright as if recently painted. Sansa greeted him by the great hall's doors, her copper hair braided in a coronet around her head. She wore a heavy cloak of gray fur that accentuated the pale edges of her face, making her look every inch the queen. For a moment, Jon saw the sister he remembered from childhood in her bright blue eyes, but only a heartbeat later he saw the proud, battle-tested monarch she had become. They embraced, awkwardly at first, then more warmly, as if reminded they were each other's last close family from the old days. Ghost sidled up to Sansa and nuzzled her side, letting out a soft whine that made her smile. They retreated inside the hall, where a meal had been hastily prepared. At the long table near the hearth, Jon introduced Tormund and the other free folk as his companions. Sansa, with unflinching courtesy, had seats arranged for them and commanded her stewards to bring wine. Yet tension lay like a coiled serpent in the corners of the room. The North had fought alongside the free folk in the Great War, but old prejudices never died easily. Every northern retainer in the hall wore a cautious expression, and some hardly hid their distrust. Sansa, though, remembered that the free folk had spilled blood on the same fields as they had. Her face was gentle but serious as she addressed them. "You are our brothers in arms," she said. "You have every right to speak and be heard in Winterfell." That was more acceptance than any wildling had ever known behind these walls. Tormund gave her a respectful nod. Jon asked for a private conference with Sansa. They retired to one of the smaller solar chambers away from prying ears. There, over a single candle flickering in a brass holder, Jon laid out what he had in mind. He told her of the free folks' precarious situation, of their desire to live in peace but also remain free. He explained that they would no longer be content to dwell in the wilderness, constantly threatened by the possibility of a shift in politics south of the Wall, especially if a future ruler saw them as a menace. They needed a stable home, a place of their own, recognized and respected by the North. Jon also admitted that he found himself bound to them, not just out of duty, but out of the love he had formed for their spirit, for the people he had fought beside. Sansa studied him, the candlelight dancing on her features. She listened intently to his plan, a new kingdom distinct from the 7, or now 6, kingdoms. A place that recognized both the free folk and the North as equal partners. Something that preserved each side's autonomy but established a united front. Jon's vision went beyond just the bounds of the Old Night's Watch territory. He saw farmland in the gift, the possibility of building hamlets and small strongholds that bridged the gap between Winterfell and the wild North. If done right, trade could flow. People could move freely without fear. The North would gain new allies, while the free folk would finally have a recognized claim to the land they had lived on for millennia. Yet the idea was breathtakingly large, almost unimaginable. It would mean rewriting centuries of tradition. Sansa drew a careful breath. She respected Jon and had seen the impossible become reality more than once in their lifetimes. But she was the queen in the North, and her duty was to protect her people from any threat, real or perceived. Would the Northerners accept such a radical alliance? Would the lords of the major houses bow to this concept of a new kingdom that blurred boundaries between them and those once labeled barbarians? Jon's heart pounded. He spoke with fervor. "You know me," he said, voice low and husky with the intensity of his plea. "You know I'd never do anything to harm the North. But we owe the free folk. They fought for us. They died for us. They've lived behind that wall for centuries, a wall that was built to keep out the White Walkers, not them. The threat is gone now. It's time to break down the barriers that remain." Sansa, who had always been adept at reading people, could see the passion in his eyes. Slowly, she nodded. "This is a monumental step, Jon. We'll have to bring the lords to a council. We'll have to ensure the small folk aren't frightened. But if it can be done peacefully, it might just be the beginning of something better." They emerged with a plan. Over the next few days, ravens were sent out to the major houses still standing in the North: Manderly of White Harbor, Glover of Deepwood Motte, Serwyn of Castle Serwyn, and others. Lords and ladies arrived, curious and guarded. They gathered in Winterfell's Great Hall, a place still bearing the scars of recent wars, to hear what Jon and Sansa had to say. Jon stood before them, Tormund and several free folk representatives at his side. He spoke of forging a new kingdom that recognized the North and the free folk as equals, with Jon as the mediator between them if they would have him. The North would retain its distinct identity with Sansa as its queen, but they would expand the realm's accepted population to include the free folk, awarding them land that was at present largely unsettled. Together, they would build a new seat, perhaps somewhere near the wall, as a symbol of unity, a place to replace the old watchtowers and fortresses that once only served to keep people apart. At first, the proposition was met with unease. Lord Glover, a hardened man, objected, saying it was too large a gamble. But Lady Manderly, seeing the potential for trade routes and fishing agreements, was cautiously supportive. So the debate began. Some lords recalled how the free folk had raided northern villages in past generations, burning and killing. Tormund, in his blunt, unapologetic way, admitted those were dark times, but things had changed. He recounted how he and his people had fought side by side with the North, how they had bled in the snows outside Winterfell to save the realm from a fate worse than death. Could that new bond be so easily brushed aside because of grudges from centuries past? Jon watched the lords closely. When necessary, he invoked his father's memory, Ned Stark, who had always strove for fairness and justice, even in dire circumstances. He cited examples of how the North had forgiven House Bolton's atrocities in the sense that they had allowed the remnants of any misguided soldiers to swear fealty anew. "If we can forgive men who turned on us," Jon said, voice measured but strong, "then we can embrace those who died for us, who never really sought to conquer us but only to survive." It was not a quick or simple argument. Days of deliberation wore on, with each house voicing concerns. Sansa and her advisors meticulously laid out potential trade benefits, the security of a stronger border, the advantage of having formidable warriors at their side. Some were swayed by practical concerns, others allowed old suspicions to linger. But with each passing day, the presence of the free folk in Winterfell, who were respectful if a bit odd in their customs, began to soften attitudes. There were no drunken brawls, no savage acts. In fact, some of the men in the courtyard found themselves jesting with Tormund, trading tall tales. A few even taught the free folk how to mend chainmail or properly care for the warhorses of the North. Small gestures, but they built trust in a way grand speeches never could. Finally, a consensus was reached. The lords agreed tentatively to support the establishment of a new territory that would be recognized as a partner to the North as long as certain conditions were met, including guaranteeing safe trade routes and an oath of non-aggression. Sansa would remain queen in the North, and Jon would stand as a kind of high protector for both peoples, bridging the gap. The official name was debated, but for the time being, it was simply called the New Kingdom, or colloquially Jon's Bridge. Tormund found that moniker hilarious. Yet the significance of what they were doing was not lost on anyone. With the North's approval, Jon and Tormund returned to the great clearing north of the Wall, where the free folk had gathered in anticipation. Jon spoke in plain terms about the alliance. He promised them land of their own, enough territory around the base of the Wall, stretching out into the Gift, possibly extending further if more people came. They would have the right to rule themselves, their elders retaining their traditions and leaders. But they would no longer be scattered tribes, isolated and easy to threaten. They would be recognized by the rest of Westeros, at least by the North, as equals, with Jon standing as their advocate. And if a day came when the southern kingdoms learned of this arrangement, Jon would be there to argue on their behalf. He didn't expect universal acceptance. The free folk had always lived free from the constraints of lords and kings. Some might be skeptical about forging an official kingdom with laws. But Tormund, along with other prominent elders, had prepared the groundwork. They explained that this was not bending the knee in the old sense, it was forging a new identity that protected their children and gave them a future beyond constant migration. Many remembered the tragedy at Harhome, the endless nights of terror, how close they had come to annihilation. Stability, for once, sounded appealing, and they had come to trust Jon Snow to deal fairly with them. Thus, it was decided. The first step was to choose a locat, Ion, for their seat of governance. They selected a stretch of land near the abandoned site of Queensgate, one of the smaller keeps along the Wall, where the old fortress stood in partial ruin. It lay at an intersection of old roads that led south into the Gift and north into the wide tundra. With time, they could build it into a gathering place, a city that blended the northerners' stonework with the free folks' more natural approach to living. The day they broke ground was a day of celebration, with Tormund leading a rousing cheer and Sansa sending supplies, lumber, masons, and wagons of tools. Jon was at the heart of it all, laboring with the men, hefting beams of wood and hauling stones. This was more than he had ever dreamed possible. He found himself buoyed by a sense of purpose. Each day dawned with new tasks, organizing hunts for game, discussing irrigation channels with northern builders, teaching the free folk children how to read some of the old runes that mapped out the Gift. It was exhausting work, but it felt right, as though every hardship of his life had culminated in this endeavor. Inevitably, trouble brewed. Not everyone in the North was pleased. A few minor lordlings, especially from border areas, refused to recognize the arrangement. One such lord, Harold Slate, began to stir animosity, claiming that these wildlings would revert to raids and marauding. He refused to pay any levies or taxes toward the new settlement. It threatened the fragile agreement, as other lords wondered if they should follow Slate's lead. Sansa dispatched envoys to reason with him, but he turned them away, demanding that the free folk remain on their side of the Wall. Jon set out with a small band, intending a peaceful conversation, but was met at the gates of Lord Slate's keep by armed guards who refused them entry. For a time, it seemed an impasse. But Sansa proved her diplomatic mettle. She summoned Slate to Winterfell under pretext of settling old disputes about farmland. When he arrived, surrounded by men-at-arms, he found himself face to face not only with Sansa, but with Tormund and a delegation of free folk elders. They invited him to speak his concerns plainly. He raged about the old ways, told terrible tales of wildling raids that had cost his family dear. Tormund nodded gravely, understanding the pain behind such words, but also stating that they all had ghosts in their past. The difference now was that they had fought together against the dead. There was no reason they could not forge a new way forward. For all his bluster, Slate realized he stood alone in this. No other major houses were supporting his stance. Slowly, grudgingly, he backed down, though his bitterness lingered. It was a sign that not everyone would easily come to accept the new order. Despite such setbacks, construction progressed. Walls rose, roads were cleared, and small huts for the free folk were built, while more permanent structures of stone began to form the heart of what some had begun calling Snow's Hold. Yet Jon disliked the name and insisted that it should reflect their unity rather than just him. Tormund teased that it should be called Giantsbane's Keep, to which everyone laughed. In any case, the settlement stood as a living testimony to the power of cooperation. The free folk contributed their hunting expertise, providing fresh meat and furs. The northerners brought skilled craftsmanship, blacksmiths, carpenters, masons. Together, they created a fledgling city that straddled the boundary of two worlds. Within months, it was bustling with activity, children running between tents and half-finished walls, more and more families arriving to stake a claim in this new future. Jon often walked among them at twilight, after the day's labor. He would see groups of northerners and free folk gathered around a central fire, sharing stories and passing a skin of ale. The tall pine trees around them sighed in the wind, and overhead, the stars shone like scattered diamonds. It seemed to him a wondrous thing, how only a few years ago, they had been bitter enemies, separated by the wall and centuries of animosity. Now they laughed together. Sometimes, at the edge of the firelight, Jon thought he glimpsed Ygritte's face, her wild red hair and fierce eyes, reminding him of how he had first come to know the free folk. He would feel a pang of sadness, but also gratitude, for she had opened his eyes to a larger world. If only she could have seen it now. Yet the question remained, how would the rest of Westeros view this new kingdom? Word was beginning to spread south. Merchants traveling to White Harbor carried tales of a rising city north of the wall where wildlings and northerners dwelled in harmony. Some scoffed, some were alarmed. Rumors circulated that the Iron Throne, now occupied by a new monarch after the tumultuous events that ended the previous war, might see this as a threat or an aberration. There were concerns that they might dispatch an army to enforce the unity of the realm. But for the time being, the official stance from the Iron Throne was ambivalent. Perhaps they were too busy with their own rebuilding to mount an expedition north over dangerous roads. Perhaps they believed the far north no longer worth the trouble. Regardless, it gave Jon and his people the time they needed to solidify their hold. Sansa, as queen in the north, maintained a careful balancing act. She assured them that she would protect this new kingdom in the sense that she would not betray it to the southern courts. But she also made it clear that if they wanted the protection of the North's banners, they would have to abide by their vow of peace. Jon agreed, and so did Tormund. The success of this enterprise depended on the free folks' willingness to remain neighborly and on the North's pledge to keep the old grudges buried. The turning of the seasons brought new challenges. As winter receded, thawing the ground, travelers from across the neck began heading north. A few were curious lords, some were mercenaries, others were small folk simply seeking a new start. But among them were thieves and opportunists too, drawn by stories of a frontier kingdom without established guard. Jon had expected this. He organized a system of patrols, a joint force of free folk rangers and northern soldiers. They scouted the forests, manned small outposts, and deterred banditry. In one instance, they caught a band of outlaws who had been preying on supply wagons headed for Snow's Hold. Instead of simply executing them, Jon insisted on giving them a fair hearing. This stunned the outlaws. Some eventually opted to swear service to the new kingdom rather than face punishment, turning from criminals to laborers. Jon believed that second chances were part of what made this place different. Tormund teased him about it, saying that one day Jon's big heart might get him killed again. But there was respect in the big man's eyes. Month by month, the settlement prospered. They erected a main keep and a wooden palisade around the perimeter. Smoke from the forges mingled with the fresh scent of pine. A broad yard for training with swords and spears was established, used by both free folk and northerners alike. Children learned to shoot arrows side by side, taught by archers from both backgrounds. A modest stable housed shaggy northern horses, while some of the free folk began capturing and taming the large hardy animals native to the far north. The interplay of cultures began to weave a tapestry that was both distinctive and surprisingly cohesive. Elders from the free folk presided over certain rituals, like the naming of newborns beneath the open sky, while northern septons, or those still loyal to the old gods, offered blessings of their own. Nothing was forced, everything was a choice, accepted or declined according to each family's tradition. Amid this bustling life, Jon found moments of quiet reflection. Sometimes at dawn, he'd walk along the parapets of the rising keep, Ghost at his side, and look out over the plains that stretched beyond. The wind carried the sense of pine and cold earth. He would remember how, as a boy, he had dreamed of being a knight or a ranger, never imagining he could help shape something entirely new. Each day, his hair grew a little wilder, his face gained new lines from the stress of leadership, but his eyes held a certain calm. He knew he was finally where he belonged. Of course, not all was placid. The specter of old animosities lingered. A small group of free folk, unhappy with what they viewed as too much cooperation with kneelers, broke away from the main tribe. They fled further north, where they could live without the influence of any lords. Tormund tried to dissuade them, but they were adamant. A few violent incidents occurred, particularly the sabotage of a newly constructed storehouse that burned to the ground one night. Evidence pointed to the breakaway faction. Jon had to handle it carefully, dispatching scouts to track them down, hoping for a parley. Tormund volunteered for the mission, reasoning that they might listen to him. He returned empty-handed but said that the group was too far gone in their hatred of anything reminiscent of Southron rule. There would be no reconciliation there. Jon was forced to fortify the keep against potential raids, adding more patrols. It was a sobering reminder that not everyone desired this new peace. Yet the majority stood by Jon, and the settlement's momentum only grew. Over time, travelers from even further south, some from the Vale, some from the Riverlands, heard of the free kingdom of the north, a place where folk could start anew without fear of tyrannical lords. A trickle of new arrivals showed up, carefully crossing the neck and journeying through the north with the blessing of Lady Sansa. Some had trades to offer: smithing, brewing, weaving. Some just wanted to escape old feuds or debts. They were greeted with curiosity by the free folk, who had never seen so many different accents or styles of dress. Jon made sure there were open arms for those who came peacefully. It was how any kingdom grew, by accepting those willing to work and respect the rules. One evening, at the cusp of autumn, Jon stood atop the watchtower that had been repaired. From there, he could see a flickering line of torchlight winding its way toward the settlement. Another group of new arrivals, escorted by a small detachment of northern soldiers. He wondered who they were, what had driven them to come so far. This was how the new kingdom thrived, by being a refuge and a beacon. But it also meant that the old ways would continue to transform. Tormund teased that one day they'd have minstrels singing soft southern ballads in their halls. Jon smiled at the thought. Maybe that wouldn't be so bad. A hush of realization stole over him then, as the torches drew closer and the stars shimmered above. He felt the presence of all those he had lost: Ned Stark, Robb, Ygritte, even Daenerys, and all the tangled complexities of that war. He could not change the tragedy of the past, but here he had carved out a new path for the living, one that might last long after he was gone. He made a silent vow to keep building, keep forging alliances, keep protecting those who called this land home, no matter their origin. And so the days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Snow's Hold, as many persisted in calling it, despite Jon's protest, grew in both size and reputation. A wooden gate was erected, complete with carved figures of direwolves and mammoths, symbolizing the union of the free folk and the north. Inside the walls, tents were gradually replaced by wooden huts and, in time, even some stone cottages. The streets bustled with traders on market days, exchanging goods, furs, dried fish, carved bone trinkets for tools or fresh produce from the north. A smith from White Harbor set up a forge that clanged day and night, forging nails, horseshoes, and the occasional sword. Jon presided over disputes in a makeshift hall, hearing cases with a stoic fairness reminiscent of his father's brand of justice. He was not a crowned king, nor did he desire that. But he was a leader recognized by both sides, the one who balanced compassion with the necessary hardness to maintain order. In that hall, the hushed watchers would witness a free folk warrior and a Northman farmer argue over grazing lands, only to emerge with a compromise that neither side had believed possible. That was the true magic of the place, the bridging of differences through a shared desire to live and prosper. Word came from Winterfell that Sansa was expecting an envoy from the Iron Throne, someone curious to see how the North fared and perhaps to glean whether rumors of this new domain were true. Sansa sent a message encouraging Jon to prepare, as it was quite possible that the envoys would request to visit. The notion set the settlement abuzz. Tormund, for his part, liked to talk about how he'd introduced those southern fancy folk to a real northern feast featuring roast elk and black bear stew. Jon mentally prepared himself for the prospect of formal negotiations, perhaps the first true test of how Westeros would respond to their experiment in unity. Despite the swirling possibilities, no immediate threat materialized. For the time being, the Iron Throne seemed more occupied with stabilizing the territories that remained after the war. Jon was grateful for the reprieve. It allowed him and his people to further entrench their presence. More farmland was cleared, following the old tradition in the gift. Grain was planted, though the climate was harsh, requiring hardy varieties. The free folk contributed their knowledge of gathering the wild edibles, berries, roots, and herbs that grew in the far north, augmenting the diets of new settlers who often only knew how to farm southern crops. One crisp morning, Sansa visited in person, riding into Snow's Hold at the head of a small retinue. The settlement had changed dramatically since she'd last seen it. A hush settled over the people as the queen in the north dismounted, her eyes sweeping over the wooden palisade, the open market, the clusters of huts, the half-finished tower that rose above them all. She seemed astonished. Jon greeted her with a rare, genuine smile. She embraced him, and for a fleeting moment, they were simply siblings again, reuniting in a safe place they had helped build. Then the formality returned. Sansa's retinue included some of her advisors as well as stewards carrying not just letters but gifts. Bolts of cloth, casks of wine, certain refined metals from the south. They walked through the settlement together, a swirl of excitement among the people. Children pointed at the Stark banners. Free folk warriors eyed the newcomers warily, but there was no animosity, only curiosity and a touch of pride in showing off what they had accomplished. Tormund found them, greeting Sansa with a grand bow that elicited laughter. "You look good, Queen," he said, smirking. "Less worried than the last time I saw you. Must be that fancy castle life." Sansa accepted the jest graciously. She could see that the settlement was more than mere talk, it was alive. She met with some of the elders, admired the craftsmanship on display, and sat in council with Jon to discuss the practical matters of trade, taxes, and mutual defense. They spoke at length about how the flow of goods could be improved, how the roads needed to be maintained to ensure safe passage. They devised a system where Snow's Hold could pay a modest tribute to Winterfell, not in coin, at least, not yet, but in furs, game, and certain raw materials gleaned from the far north. In return, the North would guarantee military assistance if an outside force threatened them. It was a new form of fealty, less about subservience and more about partnership. That evening, a feast was held in the main hall, still unfinished, with open beams overhead and the night sky visible through certain gaps. Torches and lanterns gave the space a warm glow. Long tables were laden with hearty fare, roasted boar, venison stew, loaves of coarse bread, bowls of winterberries, and even a cask of ale from Winterfell. People ate side by side, northerners and free folk, with Sansa seated at the high table, Jon at her right, Tormund at her left. Laughter mingled with the crackle of the fires. Jon glanced around, soaking in the sight. This was not a royal court nor a typical northern banquet. It was something altogether new. There were no courtly dances or stuffy protocols, just a raw, genuine sense of camaraderie. As the night wore on, a hush fell when Sansa stood, raising a cup. She spoke of the dark times they had endured, of the war against the dead, the battles in the south, and how out of that darkness, something extraordinary had emerged. She commended Jon for his vision and Tormund for his unwavering friendship. She toasted the new kingdom, stating that she believed it to be the future of the North, a living monument to cooperation, and that she would do all in her power to nurture it. The applause came in the form of fists pounding on the tables, voices raised in cheers, the free folk ululating in their own style. Jon felt his chest tighten. For so long, he had been a reluctant hero, a man forced into leadership. Now he felt a quiet acceptance of his role. This was not about glory, but about ensuring a better life for people who had known only hardship. After the feast, Sansa and Jon slipped out into the cold night for a brief walk. They strolled past the half-finished walls, the orange glow of torches illuminating patches of muddy ground and stacked lumber. Ghost padded behind them silently. The moon hung low, a pale disk in the sky, bathing the world in silver light. Sansa paused, gazing at Jon. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "Father would be proud. You've done what he always wanted to do, help the people, keep them safe, give them justice. And not just the noble houses, but all people." Jon felt warmth rising to his face. "I only did what needed to be done," he murmured. "I couldn't just abandon them." She gave a ghost of a smile. "You never could turn your back on someone who needed you. Even when we were children." She touched his arm, a light, sisterly gesture. "Things are still fragile, though. We'll have challenges from inside and out. But I'll stand with you, as will the North. And I trust you'll stand with the North, no matter what storms come." He nodded. "Always." They parted the next morning, Sansa returning to Winterfell. Jon watched her ride away, the dust of the road trailing behind her party. He felt a pang of gratitude. They had come far from the horrors they had endured. He prayed to whatever gods might listen that they would have a chance to keep building. In the months that followed, more construction, more arrivals, more small crises that tested their fledgling kingdom. A sickness spread among some of the children, threatening to become an epidemic. Jon and Tormund rallied the healers, both northern maesters and wise women among the free folk, to contain and treat it. Lives were lost, heartbreak endured. But the combined knowledge of both cultures eventually subdued the outbreak, forging a stronger bond of trust between them. They learned from each other's remedies, shared supplies, comforted the grieving families. When the sickness passed, they held a solemn ceremony, burying the dead in a new graveyard outside the walls. Jon, mindful of everyone's beliefs, allowed each family to perform the rites they saw fit, some calling upon the old gods beneath a weirwood, others simply praying in the open air. It was a testament to their collective resilience. Challenges also arose in the form of resource scarcity. Even with farmland being cultivated, they had to ensure enough food for the growing population. Tormund led hunting expeditions deeper into the forests, while northern traders brought surplus grain up from more temperate areas in exchange for furs and northern herbs. It was a delicate balance, but each obstacle overcome further cemented the people's faith in the new kingdom. Jon was aware of the undercurrents of tension, worries about southern armies, rivalries with breakaway free folk clans, the uncertain loyalty of minor northern lords like Harold Slate. But for now, progress overshadowed the cracks. As the settlement matured, Jon found himself acting as a bridge not just politically, but in a personal sense. He officiated a wedding between a young free folk huntress and a blacksmith's son from the north. The two had met while working on the keep's walls, bonding over a shared sense of curiosity. Their union symbolized the deeper melding of the two cultures. The wedding feast was a raucous affair, featuring both free folk traditions, like the bride and groom drinking mead from a horn, and northern ones, like reciting vows beneath a weirwood branch. The entire hall erupted in cheers when Jon announced them joined. Later, Tormund pounded Jon on the back, exclaiming, You see, Crow, we're all mixing now. Soon enough, you won't be able to tell a Stark from a wildling." Jon laughed, imagining a future where those distinctions mattered little. And so the new kingdom took root, its people forging a shared identity day by day. They found unity in the simple tasks of living, building homes, raising children, weathering storms. They discovered that fear receded when you saw your neighbor's face every morning, working beside you. There were no illusions that old hatred died easily. Some hearts would remain stubborn, but the tides of change were rolling in. Even the environment seemed to reflect their endeavor, as spring brought a robust thaw and the rivers teemed with fish. In quiet corners, you could hear the hum of possibility, as if the land itself approved. Over a year into the settlement's establishment, Jon stood at the crest of a hill overlooking the sprawl of huts, farm plots, and the central keep with its budding towers. Smoke curled from dozens of chimneys, rising into the brisk morning air. He could see people moving along the main street, a mix of northern cloaks and free folk furs. The occasional bright color from a southern traveler who had decided to stay. Horses whinnied in a nearby stable. From behind him came the hushed whisper of wind through pines. Ghost trotted up, pressing a white-furred muzzle against Jon's gloved hand. Jon rubbed the direwolf's head absently, eyes fixed on the small city they had built. He remembered the oath he had made years ago, to watch over the realms of men as part of the Night's Watch. That vow had led him here, through death and heartbreak, betrayal and war, to this vantage point. He was still watching over them in a sense, though not in the same black cloak. The realm had changed, and so had he. He was no longer simply the bastard of Winterfell, nor the king in the north, nor even the reluctant Targaryen heir. He was something else, a protector of a new dream, a man who stood between boundaries and invited them to dissolve. Down in the settlement, Tormund was probably cajoling a new band of arrivals or working on the next project, maybe building an actual stone wall around the keep or setting up a better system for distributing food. The big man had taken to leadership in his own way, alternating between boisterous humor and fierce determination. Jon had come to rely on him as not just a friend, but a pillar of strength in forging the new kingdom. Together, they had steered the course of history in a direction no one had quite imagined, proving that with enough goodwill, people once separated by centuries of conflict could unite under a common banner of survival and hope. He felt a sense of quiet at how life prevailed, how people found reasons to move on from the devastation of the wars. As he turned to descend the hill, he knew that challenges still lay on the horizon, perhaps a future confrontation with the Iron Throne, perhaps internal rifts that could threaten all they had built. But he also believed in the determination of these people, in their willingness to do what was needed to maintain the fragile peace. And he believed in himself, in the lessons learned from Ned Stark, from Mance Rayder, from Ser Davos and Samwell Tarly and Tyrion Lannister, and from those who had shown him that honor mattered, but so did compassion. Jon Snow walked down to the settlement he called home, passing through the wooden gates where the carved dire wolves and mammoths welcomed all who came in peace. A pair of guards, one northern soldier, one free folk warrior, nodded at him respectfully. He crossed the muddy courtyard, pausing to greet a group of children who were chasing each other with wooden swords. They giggled and scrambled away. Behind them, an older woman, a midwife from White Harbor, shook her head, exasperated but smiling. The sun climbed, bathing Snow's hold in golden light. In the keep's main hall, he found Tormund bellowing orders to a pair of men who were lifting a heavy beam into place, reinforcing the rafters. When the big man saw Jon, he waved and stomped over, wiping sweat from his brow. "Ah, there you are, you lazy crow," he teased. "We were about to string the beam up all by ourselves. Thought maybe you were off kissing your direwolf again." Jon rolled his eyes but grinned. He lent a hand with the beam, bracing his shoulder under its weight as they maneuvered it into position. There was a round of effort and curses in both northern and free folk languages, but eventually it fit snugly. The men stepped back, surveying their work. It was a simple but satisfying achievement, another piece of the hall taking shape, another step toward permanence. Tormund nudged Jon's shoulder. "You know," he said, "one day, folk'll tell stories about the great Jon Snow, the man who wouldn't stay dead, who built a kingdom out of nothing. They'll forget all the times you nearly froze your balls off beyond the wall." Jon chuckled. "Let them tell their stories," he replied. "I'll be too busy to care." Tormund's expression became briefly serious, an uncharacteristic weight in his gaze. "You've done well, Jon. We all have. I never imagined I'd see our people and the North living like this, like kin." Jon placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "It was only possible because we all believed. The North, the free folk, each other." He paused, swallowing hard. "And we keep believing, even when it's not easy." Tormund nodded, then slapped Jon's back hard enough to nearly knock him forward. "All right, enough sentiment. Let's get back to work before the next wagon arrives. I heard we're getting a few more masons and possibly a septon. Imagine that, a septon preaching to the free folk. We'll make a believer out of him soon enough." They parted with shared laughter, going off to their tasks. The day wore on in a flurry of building, planning, and overseeing. Towards dusk, Jon found a moment to rest and sat on a low stone bench outside the keep. He watched the sunset paint the sky in streaks of pink and orange, the clouds drifting like slow ships. Ghost lay at his feet, ears pricked as the sounds of hammers and saws gradually quieted. Smoke rose from a dozen hearth fires, families settling in for the evening. Jon let his mind wander. He recalled the day he had first met the free folk, how alien they had seemed then, how very much like enemies. He remembered the swirling chaos of battles, the heartbreak of losing so many he loved, the unexpected weight of titles thrust upon him. Now he looked around and saw the fruit of those sacrifices. Perhaps that was the way of the world. Only through the darkest nights could one appreciate the dawn. And this dawn had come, forging a kingdom that never existed before, in a corner of the world that had always been considered cold and desolate. The warmth of unity made it a place of promise, even if that promise was fragile. He murmured to Ghost, "We did it, boy. It's not perfect, but it's ours." The direwolf's red eyes flicked up at him, and Jon swore he saw a kind of contentment in them. Perhaps that was his own reflection. Slowly, people gathered in the courtyard, drawn by the onset of evening. Torches were lit, sending dancing shapes across the walls. Tormund came by, sloshing a large wooden cup of ale into Jon's hand. To the new day, he toasted, raising his cup. Jon clinked the cup against Tormund's, and they both drank deep. Around them, the new kingdom breathed. Children laughing, blacksmiths stoking forges, mothers calling their families to sup, watchmen lighting the gates. It was not a grand city like King's Landing, nor an austere fortress like Winterfell. It was a place of raw beginnings, hammered into shape by grit and hope. A kingdom for the free, for the bold, for those who believed in second chances and bridging divides. Jon felt his spirits lift, a sense of gratitude flooding him. This, he realized, was what he had been fighting for all along, even when he hadn't known it. A realm where old grudges were undone, where a new chapter in the story of the North and the free folk could be written by the people themselves. Night settled in fully, stars pinwheeling across the velvety sky. Jon finished his ale and set the cup aside. A hush fell as families retreated to their homes, embers glowing in the fire pits. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fresh hurdles. But that was all right? He rose from the bench, giving Ghost a gentle pat, and made his way inside, footsteps echoing in the keep's corridors. A comfortable weariness claimed his bones, yet his heart was light. The last thought he had before drifting to sleep in his modest chamber was that, for the first time in a very long while, he felt at peace with the life he was living and the people he served. The morning sun found Jon Snow already awake, standing by a narrow window that overlooked the courtyard. Below, workers bustled about, some rolling barrels of tar for construction, others saddling horses for scouting runs. He allowed himself a small smile. This was a routine now. Each day, the kingdom grew. Each day, they proved doubters wrong simply by continuing to exist. He dressed in simple clothes, a sturdy leather jerkin, thick trousers, and his cloak. The notion of wearing a crown or fancy robes had never appealed to him, nor would it. If anything, he preferred to remain approachable, walking among the people without fanfare. Pushing open the door, he stepped into the corridor, greeted by the clang of distant hammers. The keep's interior was slowly taking shape, walls smoothed with plaster, wooden floors laid in certain chambers. Servants moved about, though they were a mixture of northerners and former free folk who had discovered they liked the stability of a settled life. They bowed or nodded respectfully to Jon, who acknowledged them with a quiet nod of his own. Tormund was likely out in the yard already, yelling at someone or cracking jokes with the masons. Jon descended a short flight of stairs and emerged into the open air. A fresh wind greeted him, carrying the scents of pine and earth. The sky was a clear, pale blue, promising a mild day. Perfect for continuing the work of bridging differences, both literal and metaphorical. A group of children chasing each other around a half-built wagon paused to wave to him. Jon lifted a hand in return. Their laughter danced across the yard, weaving a bright thread in the tapestry of the morning. He strode toward the center of the courtyard, exchanging words with the foreman of a building crew who gave him updates on materials running low. Then with a northern ranger who reported that the roads south were clear of bandits. Finally, with a free folk elder who asked about the possibility of building a larger communal hall for the tribe gatherings. Each conversation was direct, respectful, and laced with the understanding that everyone's voice mattered here. He took note, promising to address each concern in the next council meeting. And thus he continued, day by day, building a realm out of hope, forging a new destiny for the free folk and the North, one stone at a time, one trust at a time. Stepping back, it might have appeared an impossible dream, but standing within it, seeing the walls and the families, hearing children's laughter and the ring of hammers, it became undeniably real. And if that was not magic in its own right, then Jon Snow no longer knew what was. He carried on with the unwavering resolve of a man who had, in many ways, already seen death and chosen life. He might never sit on the Iron Throne or wear the official title of king, but to the men, women, and children under his care, he was their protector, their guide, and sometimes even their friend. He was the man who made it possible for two peoples, long divided, to unite under a banner of understanding. And for Jon Snow, that was enough, more than enough, to fill the emptiness that once haunted him. Outside the walls of Snow's Hold, the vast northern landscape stretched without end, dotted with thick forests and distant mountains, silent and waiting for history to be written anew. The wind blew across the tundra, whispering secrets of old battles and ancient grudges, only to find that here, within these growing walls, a new story was being told. One of kinship, endurance, and the simple, profound truth that all people, regardless of what side of the wall they had been born on, deserved a chance to stand together under the same wide sky. And in that shared sky, the promise of the future gleamed brighter than any star. Jon Snow rose before dawn each day. In those quiet, inky hours, the citadel of Snow's Hold belonged entirely to shadows and the distant call of night birds roosting in the rafters. He would dress in silence, pulling on sturdy breeches and a worn leather jerkin, leaving his cloak folded neatly on the bench. The old habit of strapping on a sword belt remained, though he often left Longclaw in his solar when he walked the grounds now. Even here, in this fledgling realm of uneasy peace, he had to be ready for the sudden lash of violence. He had learned that long ago. He could feel the change in the air as summer advanced into the far north. It was not the scorching summer of the south, but a mild shift where the mornings proved brisk rather than glacial, and the midday sun lingered above them like a curious overseer, burning away the usual chill. The night's curtain still fell quickly, but the winter winds no longer clawed at the bones of man and beast alike. There were more births in the settlement, healthy births, with children who carried the combined legacy of the North and the free folk. Jon often saw them toddling through the muddy streets behind their mothers, bright-eyed and full of that fearless curiosity that only children possess. On this particular day, he left the keep through a postern gate and climbed a small rise that afforded a view of the entire settlement. Many huts sprawled below, arranged in a rough circle about the central keep. The wooden palisade, once a rushed structure, had been fortified with stone along its lower reaches, and a gatehouse with thick wooden doors now stood as a testament to their growing resources. Within the walls, people stirred, smoke curling from hearth fires, the soft lowing of a cow that one of the new families had managed to bring north, and the distant clink of a blacksmith already working at his anvil. Jon watched it all from above, thinking again how improbable it still seemed. He remembered the first days, barely a year past, when the only sounds were Tormund shouting commands to a few dozen laborers, the crackle of hastily built fires, the crash of timbers being raised into place. They had begun with so little. Now, though far from finished, Snow's Hold could no longer be mistaken for a mere encampment. It had grown into a small but determined city that bridged two worlds, veteran northern soldiers rubbing shoulders with free-roaming hunters, farmers from the gift-planting fields alongside spear wives who had always scorned walls. Ghost padded up silently behind Jon, his breath steaming in the cool air. Jon rested a hand on the direwolf's head. "We've come a long way, Ghost," he murmured, and the wolf's red eyes blinked back as if he understood every word. Then Jon inhaled sharply, catching the scent of pine and wood smoke, reminding him of how alive this land was, and how fragile their kingdom remained beneath the wide sky. He turned and walked down the slope, returning through the postern gate. Guards stood on either side, one a northern archer in a boiled leather vest, the other a broad-shouldered free-folk warrior with tattoos crawling up her arms. They nodded to Jon as he passed, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and respect. Jon offered a polite greeting. It always struck him, seeing the two so naturally side by side, how radical such a sight would have been a few short years ago. The guard tower beyond them held a freshly raised banner. It bore a dire wolf and a mammoth facing each other across a stylized break in the wall, Tormund's idea, but Jon had grown to appreciate the symbolism. The banner signified that in this place, the old divisions had given way to a shared future. He found Tormund in the courtyard, holding forth about something in his booming voice. A cluster of wide-eyed new arrivals stood around him. From their clothing, patchy cloaks, dusty boots, Jon guessed they were travelers from the south who had heard of a fresh start in the far north. Tormund was explaining the rules of the settlement. By all the gods, it was surreal to see Tormund Giantsbane, the man who once dismissed any notion of kneeling or following rules, now patiently describing how every able hand was expected to help with building, hunting, or patrolling, and how disputes were settled by a council that included elders from both the free folk and the north. The arrivals looked a mixture of nervous and relieved, seeing that Tormund was a hardy figure who did not seem eager to punish them or send them away. Jon quietly joined the group. One of the travelers, a young woman with a bandage around her left hand, glanced at him, her eyes flickering in recognition. She whispered something to her companion, a wiry man with a donkey's lead in his grip. Jon braced himself for whatever rumor they might have heard about him. that he was a resurrected lordling, that he was once king in the north, that he had Targaryen blood. Rumors abounded, most half-true or twisted beyond sense. He gave the woman a slight nod. She immediately bowed her head, as if uncertain how to address him. Jon tried a small smile to put her at ease, then raised his voice so all the newcomers could hear. "You're all welcome here," he said. "Tormund speaks truly. You'll have a place if you contribute. We're still building homes and setting up farmland, so there's plenty of work to be done. Free folk customs might be strange to you, but give yourselves time. Respect one another. And if you have questions, you can speak to the elders or come to me." They listened with an intensity that told him they were desperate for some stability. Jon saw relief on their faces, as if they had found a haven they hardly believed could exist. He tried not to dwell on the weight that put on his shoulders. Tormund wrapped an arm around him, nearly crushing Jon's shoulder in a friendly hug, and said, "There, you see? This is the one who holds it all together. Don't let his brooding face scare you. Underneath, he's gentler than a baby lamb." Jon muttered good-naturedly enough Tormund as the newcomers let out hesitant chuckles. Then Tormund directed them toward a cluster of half-built cottages near the western side of the hold where an older free folk woman would help them get settled. The group left, trailing excitement and uncertain hope behind them. Jon and Tormund stood a moment in companionable silence. Then Tormund scratched at his thick beard. "More every day. Sooner or later, we'll need to spread out beyond these walls or we'll be living atop each other like fleas." Jon nodded. "We have to finish reinforcing the palisade and building enough homes to get us through winter. We can't risk leaving people exposed. But if we keep growing, we'll need another settlement or two. Why not take more land in the gift?" Tormund suggested. "There's farmland going to waste and the north hasn't settled all of it." "It's an option," Jon conceded, "but that land technically belongs to the Night's Watch, or it did. Now, with the Watch so diminished, Sansa and the northern lords might dispute who has the final say." He paused, thinking of the oath he once took, binding him to the Watch until death. Yet that oath had led to him being murdered by his own brothers, and his resurrection had changed everything. Still, the gift remained symbolic. "We'll talk to Sansa. She's been supportive. I can't see her objecting unless some lord or other tries to stir up trouble." Tormund grunted. "Then talk to her we shall. She respects you. Besides, she's got bigger concerns to the south. From what your letters say, this new king or queen on the Iron Throne might start paying attention soon." Jon gave a weary sigh. Indeed, tidings from Winterfell indicated that the Iron Throne was no longer simply ignoring them. Word of a growing realm in the far north, one that blended wildlings and northerners, had begun to reach King's Landing. While King Bran's or Queen Daenerys's reign might have been complicated in the show's telling, the story's version of the monarchy was forging its own path. Some courtiers saw the new kingdom as a curiosity, others as a threat. Sansa had warned Jon that rumors in the south painted Snow's Hold as a possible rebellious outpost that might disrupt the tenuous peace. Jon remembered well the wars that had ravaged the south. He had no desire to spark another conflict, but the threat of an intervention from King's Landing was real enough. Such an army, if it marched, would arrive with all the might of the realm behind it. Even though the North had separated itself politically, there was always the fear that the Southern monarchy would attempt to re-exert dominance. Jon's only hope was that the distance and the continuing repairs after the last war would keep them from acting rashly. Deciding there was little sense in worrying endlessly without fresh news, Jon parted ways with Tormund and headed to the keep's newly constructed council chamber, a modest but functional space with a long table, a scattering of chairs, and tapestries on the walls. Sansa had gifted the tapestries carefully woven scenes of northern landscapes to lend some warmth to what would otherwise have been bare stone. At this hour, the council chamber was largely empty. A single steward, a young man from Deepwood Motte, was setting out jugs of water and some parchment for writing. He nodded at Jon. Jon sank into a chair at the head of the table. The window behind him admitted a rectangle of pale sunlight. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth seep into his skin. Then he opened them again. He had a busy day ahead, meeting with the group that oversaw resource allocation, checking in on the farmland's progress, reviewing patrol reports along the roads that led to the gift. Once a fortnight, he held open hearings, letting anyone bring complaints or requests. He was writing down a quick list of tasks when he heard footsteps in the hall. Val, a free folk elder and one-time companion of Mance Rayder, appeared in the doorway. Jon regarded her with quiet respect. Val's presence among the free folk was influential, and her guidance was often needed for matters that Tormund's direct approach might not solve. She was slender, dressed in furs even in the warmer weather, and her eyes gleamed with an intellect sharper than most might expect. She stepped inside, her boots soft on the stone floor. "Jon Snow, I need a word with you," she said. Her tone was polite but carried urgency. Jon gestured for her to sit. She declined with a small shake of her head. Standing beside the table, she crossed her arms. "I've had reports from some hunters in the deep forest. They ran across men wearing armor bearing the sigil of a black dagger. Not a house I recognize. They spied on them from a distance but saw them drive away a group of free folk families who were traveling north to Snow's Hold." Jon's brows drew together. "Where exactly?" "West of the main road, about 3 days' ride from here, near that fork in the river." They described about a dozen men on horseback, well-armed, turning back unarmed families. One of the families had a young child who was ill, and they pleaded to be allowed passage, but the men refused. A spark of anger lit in Jon's chest. The roads to Snow's Hold were supposed to be safe for any who wished to come. "A black dagger, you say? That's not a sigil I know either. Could be mercenaries. Could be someone with a newly invented coat of arms." Val's expression hardened. "We can't let them harass people who want to come here. It undermines everything. Some of the families might decide the journey isn't worth it, or worse, they might be forced back south with no safe place to go." "I agree. We'll need to send a scouting party. Perhaps these men are bandits, or maybe they're in someone's employ. If they're claiming territory or shaking people down, we need to put a stop to it." She nodded firmly. "Let me join the party. I'm familiar with that region, and I can help find the families who were turned away if they're still wandering." Jon considered it. Val was competent and cunning. She'd led small groups through treacherous terrain before. "All right. I'll ask for volunteers from both the free folk and the north. We'll send enough to deter trouble, but not so many that it looks like we're marching an army. Report back once you've learned more." Val inclined her head in thanks. Before she left, she asked softly, "You've heard from your sister in Winterfell? Any chance she might know about these men?" Jon let out a measured breath. "I'll send a raven today. It's possible she's received word if these men have been making trouble elsewhere. Until then, we act as we see fit. We can't allow such intimidation. That's precisely why so many families are seeking refuge here." With that, Val departed, her furs trailing behind her. Jon gazed at the empty doorway. Another problem on the horizon, bandits, or something akin to them, blocking the flow of newcomers. He wondered if they were acting on orders from one of the petty lords who still resented the free folk. Harold Slate's name came to mind, or some lesser figure hoping to sabotage Snow's Hold. Or maybe it was simpler than that, just a band of cutthroats looking to profit from travelers. Either way, he had no choice but to deal with it. He left the council chamber and made his way to the newly refurbished Maester's quarters, where Maester Joss, a quiet man with salt and pepper hair, kept watch over the ravens. Joss had been sent by Winterfell at Jon's request, a chainless acolyte who had studied at the Citadel but never completed his full training. Now, he was forging his chain here in the New Kingdom, learning from experience with the help of what few tomes and mentors they could gather. Joss greeted Jon politely, and Jon explained he wanted a message sent south to Winterfell, alerting Sansa about these strangers. Joss nodded, retrieving a small slip of parchment and an inkpot, scribbling down Jon's brief words. Moments later, a dark-feathered raven was winging its way out of the keep's tower window, vanishing into the wide skies. Leaving the ravens behind, Jon made for the stables. A broad structure of timber newly expanded to hold the growing number of horses arriving with each wave of settlers. It smelled of manure, hay, and damp leather. Inside, stable hands moved among the stalls, tending to the animals. Jon found Drevin, a lanky young free folk man who served as the stable aster, brushing down an old mare. Next to him, a tall black stallion stamped its hooves, evidently impatient. Jon patted the black stallion's flank. "Easy there, boy," he murmured. The horse snorted but calmed beneath his touch. Then Jon turned to Drevin. "I need you to ready a dozen mounts. Val will pick riders to scout the western road. Put them on fast horses if you can. They may need to chase down these strangers." Drevin bobbed his head. "I will have them ready. I'll pick the best we've got for speed." Jon thanked him and stepped outside. The day was bright, the sky a brilliant cobalt blue. He paused to relish a ray of sunshine on his face. Often, he felt a pang of wonder at any warmth from the sun in these northern lands. But it was part of the new cycle they had carved out. If they could endure the winter, they deserved the summer's fleeting light. The dusty main street led past a row of homes under construction, and every corner bustled with life. A pair of northern carpenters, both bearded men who had once served in the war, busily hammered beams to frame a new house. Across from them, a free folk woman wearing a horned hat was kneading dough on an outdoor table. Children wove through the crowd, carrying wooden buckets or chasing each other with squeals of excitement. Jon recalled how he had once been told that wildling children were savage. But here they laughed and played just like any child in the Seven Kingdoms ever had. He moved along until he reached one of the storehouses, a sturdy stone building that served as a granary and general warehouse. A line of settlers waited at its entrance, each with a basket or sack to fill. A reedy steward with a ledger stood at the door, distributing rations in exchange for proof of labor or trade. The man gave Jon a respectful nod. Jon caught sight of an older free folk elder, chewing on a piece of straw, who gave him a toothless grin. Beyond that, a tall woman from White Harbor shyly nodded her thanks when Jon passed. He made sure to step out of line so as not to disrupt the flow. He wanted people to handle their daily lives without the intimidation of his presence. Nevertheless, a few turned to watch him. He had become a figure of legend in their eyes, whether he liked it or not. Perhaps that was inevitable, given his role in forging this new realm. He recognized gratitude and hope in their expressions, but also a hint of fear. Fear that all this might unravel if something happened to Jon Snow. He tried not to think about that. Snow's hold needed to stand on its own, with or without him. He was no king, only a guide to a future they all built together. Still, a kingdom's stability often depended on the figure at its heart. He made a silent vow to remain vigilant. Already, the reports of these Black Dagger men unsettled him. Could it be the start of something bigger, a push from southern usurpers, or a sabotage campaign to turn travelers away? The possibilities itched at Jon's mind as he continued his round through the hold. He stopped by the training yard, a broad patch of trodden earth encircled by wooden posts. There, a group of new militia recruits practiced spear thrusts under the watchful eye of Orvis Stonearm, a hulking free-folk fighter who had lost half of his left arm in the war against the dead but remained lethal with a spear. Orvis barked instructions, demonstrating footwork. The recruits, some from the north, others from the free clans, tried to mimic him. Jon watched for a time, offering a few words of encouragement before heading on. Next, he visited a building used as a makeshift infirmary where an elderly woman named Lisa, a midwife from the Neck, tended to the ill or injured. The inside smelled of herbs, liniments, and stale sweat. Several cots held patients recovering from accidents or fever. Lisa bustled about, dispensing remedies. Jon caught her eye and she hurried over. He asked if there were any pressing concerns and she told him about a shortage of certain herbs for fevers. "We need more golden root," she said. "It grows best near running streams. I've sent out gatherers, but we still run short with new folks arriving. People bring diseases and ailments from far-off places." Jon offered to organize a search party if needed, but Lisa smiled, showing gaps in her teeth. "We'll manage. Just don't let your fighters come in with more broken bones and sword cuts than necessary." "Doing my best," Jon said dryly and left her to her patience. He continued through the hold, greeting workers, settling small disputes. By midday, he had nearly circled the entire settlement and found himself at a vantage point overlooking the farmland beyond the walls. The farmland was still meager, fenced plots of tilled earth, a few rows of hardy northern crops, a pen for sheep. But it was growing. Some families had pitched small tents near their plots, preferring to remain close to the land they worked. A free folk huntsman might be seen lugging a freshly trapped hare to trade for barley meal. A northern farmer could be seen exchanging smoked fish with a spear wife for fresh venison. Step by step, these cultural lines blurred, replaced by the practicalities of survival and a shared dream. As Jon started back toward the keep for his midday meal, he caught sight of a flash of red hair. Tormund was hustling toward him, wearing an unusually grave expression. Immediately, Jon's senses went on alert. Tormund came to a halt, slightly out of breath. "We've got a rider," he said. "Came in through the eastern road. Where's the sigil of House Manderly?" Jon's stomach fluttered with apprehension. House Manderly, loyal to Sansa, was from White Harbor. If they had sent a messenger, it could be good news or dire news. "Let's see what they have to say," Jon said. They made their way to the courtyard where a young rider had dismounted and was brushing dust from his cloak. His face was flushed from hard travel, but he maintained a formal posture. When Jon and Tormund approached, the rider gave a slight bow. "I bring word from Lady Sansa, Queen in the North," he announced. Jon waited, arms crossed, Tormund looming behind him. "Speak." The rider drew out a small scroll. "My lord, Lady Sansa wishes to inform you that an envoy from the Iron Throne is currently at Winterfell. They arrived unexpectedly, accompanied by a small retinue of knights and scribes. She says they've inquired about Snow's Hold and have expressed interest in visiting. Lady Sansa also warns that their presence may herald a negotiation or a demand. She urges caution." Jon exhaled slowly, so it was happening sooner than he had hoped. The southern powers were taking notice, sending envoys to see what exactly was growing in the north. "Is there more?" he asked. The rider nodded. "Lady Sansa's letter includes an invitation for you and any advisors you choose to come to Winterfell. She believes it might be wise for you to speak directly with the envoy to set expectations and prevent misunderstandings that could lead to conflict. If you prefer that they travel here instead, she will make the request, but she warns it might be interpreted as a snub." Tormund gave a low grunt, crossing his muscular arms. "We can't have them strutting in here thinking they hold dominion, yet ignoring them would be worse. If we let them wander alone, they'll conjure all sorts of lies about us." Jon took the scroll, unrolling it briefly to scan Sansa's careful handwriting. He confirmed the rider's summary. An envoy from the Iron Throne had arrived, bearing official documents and apparently quite curious about the existence of this so-called new kingdom. Sansa was doing her best to keep them cordial, but she advised Jon to come to Winterfell so they could meet on neutral ground, with northern lords present to demonstrate unity. Jon handed the parchment back to the rider. "Tell Lady Sansa I'll depart within 2 days, with a small retinue. We'll address the envoy together at Winterfell." The rider bowed, relief evident in his features, and asked if he might rest the night at Snow's Hold before returning. Jon welcomed him. Tormund scratched his beard once more as he watched the young man go. "Looks like you'll be needing those fancy clothes after all, Crow," he teased, though his tone lacked real mirth. Jon forced a small grin. "I'll settle for a clean shirt, but you'll come with me." Tormund bared his teeth in a grin. I wouldn't miss it. Let's see how these southern lords react to my charm." Jon resisted the urge to bury his face in his hands. He knew Tormund's charm could be as subtle as a charging mammoth, but perhaps that was exactly the kind of presence needed. The envoy should see that the free folk were part of this realm's leadership, not merely subjects. That night, after he announced his intended departure to the council, Jon retired to his chambers earlier than usual. The keep's interior had improved significantly over the months. His own room, once a drafty, half-finished stone box, was now furnished with a decent bed, a small table, and shelves lined with books that Sansa had sent north, histories of the North, a few volumes on agriculture, and some battered accounts of the wars of Westeros. Ghost often slept in front of the hearth. Tonight, the dire wolf was already curled up, eyes half-lidded. Jon unbuckled his sword belt and set Longclaw carefully against the wall, then eased himself onto the bed. He stared at the flickering flames in the small fireplace. Weary as he was, his mind churned with possibilities. If the Iron Throne's envoys carried demands that threatened Snow's Hold, how far would he go to protect this dream? He had pledged to avoid another war. But if the South tried to subject the free folk to forced rule or demand taxes they couldn't pay, what then? Sansa would do her best to shield them, but the North could only stand against the entire realm for so long. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. The cost of leadership weighed on him. He recalled the look in Ygritte's eyes when she had called him a crow, accusing him of belonging to the wrong side. But in the end, he had found a way to transcend sides. Now he stood at the head of a new people, bound by the memory of nearly losing the world to the dead. That memory was a cautionary tale. They had triumphed once by uniting. Could the rest of Westeros not understand that such unity was still needed? Perhaps they would. He had to cling to that hope. He drifted to sleep with Ghost's quiet breathing as a lullaby, the flickers of the fire dancing across his closed eyelids. The next day dawned busy and rushed. Jon met with his closest advisors, a mix of free folk elders, northern stewards, and a couple of others who had proven themselves. They agreed that Tormund, Val, and a northern representative would accompany Jon to Winterfell. That would show the envoy a balanced face of the new kingdom. They decided the best choice for the northerner was Owen Blackwood, a reserved but fair-minded man who had come to Snow's Hold as a volunteer to help build. He had a knack for speaking the truth in a calm manner that even old cynics found persuasive. Jon made sure that any pressing issues such as the threat of the Black Dagger men and the supply concerns in the hold had someone to oversee them while he was gone. He left the day-to-day authority in the hands of a small council, instructing them to keep the peace. By mid-morning, the group was ready. Tormund wore his traditional furs, though he'd at least tried to beat the dust from them. Val dressed in practical leathers. Owen Blackwood, a tall, dark-haired man with an austere face, wore a simple tunic with the Blackwood crest discreetly sewn at the collar. Jon himself chose a tunic bearing the Stark direwolf on one sleeve and the new mammoth wolf sigil on the other, to illustrate his ties to both worlds. They mounted their horses. Jon rode a sturdy brown gelding, Tormund a chestnut mare that threatened to buck him off, and the others followed. Ghost kept pace beside Jon, loping easily on all fours. A small escort of half a dozen riders joined them, 3 free folk rangers, 3 northern soldiers. As they rode through the gates, the people of Snow's Hold turned out to watch and wave. Children cheered, and the older folk offered quiet prayers or good wishes. Jon raised a hand in acknowledgement, feeling the pressure of their hopes gather on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. They wanted him to return with good news, to ensure that this realm remained free and safe. The party took the northern road that skirted the edges of the gift. Jon had traveled this route many times by now, yet he still found the landscape quietly captivating. The tall pines, the rushing streams, the rugged terrain that reminded him of who he was. They rode for hours, occasionally stopping to let the horses drink or to check the path ahead. Conversation was sparse at first, with each rider lost in thoughts of the meeting to come. Tormund eventually broke the silence, regaling them with an exaggerated tale of how he once wrestled a bear in his youth. Owen Blackwood listened politely, while Val rolled her eyes. By the time they reached the outskirts of the gift, the sun had begun its descent, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. They made camp beside a winding creek, tying the horses near patches of grass and lighting a modest fire. Tormund and 2 of the Free Folk Rangers set out for a quick hunt, returning with 3 rabbits that they skinned and roasted. As the aroma of cooking meat drifted on the cool air, Jon sat against a log, staring into the flames. Ghost lay beside him, ears twitching at the crackle of the fire. Val approached, her face illuminated by the dancing orange glow. "Nervous?" she asked quietly, sitting near him. Jon shrugged, his voice low. "I've dealt with lords and queens and kings. I've bent the knee, commanded armies, faced the undead. But this is different. I'm not going as a mere lord or supplicant. I represent an entire people now. If I fail, the cost isn't just mine." She nodded, folding her legs. "We're all forging a path no one's walked before. Perhaps that's why you were chosen. Because you've always stepped beyond the lines others drew." Jon thought of the lines in the dirt at Harhome, the boundary between life and death, or the lines in the snow at the battle outside Winterfell. He remembered crossing them, forging alliances that seemed impossible. Maybe he conceded softly. "I just hope the Southern Lords see reason." Val's lips curved in a small smile. "They will if Sansa has any skill with them. She's shrewd. She'll guide you if you falter." Jon felt a swell of gratitude for his sister who had already done so much to ensure Snow's Hold had a chance. "Let's hope so." Tormund's roaring laughter split the night, drawing their attention. He was telling some tale to the rangers, gesturing widely with a half-chewed rabbit leg. Owen Blackwood looked on with a bemused expression, occasionally sipping from a small flask. Despite the anxiety about the coming negotiations, Jon felt a warmth in his chest. If nothing else, this group's camaraderie was genuine. They had faced enough trials to know each other's worth. They ate, posted watches through the night, and woke with the dawn. Another day of riding brought them closer to Winterfell. The moment they spied the ancient fortress rising from the northern plains, Jon felt a pang of familiarity and longing. He had grown up within those walls as a bastard overshadowed by noble siblings. Now, returning as the leader of a new realm felt surreal. He wondered if Sansa had prepared the castle for the southern envoys in the grand style that their mother, Catelyn Stark, once might have. The memory of those days tugged at him gently, but he pushed it aside. When they reached Winterfell's gates, the guards recognized Jon and let him pass. The courtyard bustled with men-at-arms, servants carrying supplies, and a pair of exotic-looking horses that likely belonged to the Iron Throne's retinue. Jon noted the war banners hung along the ramparts, the Wolf of House Stark flapping in the breeze. He felt a surge of pride that Sansa remained firmly in command here. Dismounting, he left the horses in the stable with a grateful pat, telling the stable hands to see them well fed. Ghost trotted behind him, drawing cautious looks from some of the southern knights who apparently had never seen a dire wolf up close. Tormund, Val, and Owen accompanied Jon into the main keep, led by a steward. They passed through corridors lit by torches despite the daylight, the stone walls thick and cool even in summer. Finally, they emerged into a receiving hall, a smaller chamber than the Great Hall, possibly chosen for more intimate negotiations. Sansa stood near the hearth, dressed in a dark green gown lined with gray fur. She wore a circlet of silver, a queen's token, and her copper hair was braided into a regal cascade. By her side stood 3 lords of the north, Lord Glover, Lady Mormont's cousin, the new leader of Bear Island after the war, and Lord Serwyn. All wore expressions of guarded respect for Jon as he approached. Sansa stepped forward, her lips curving in a welcoming smile. She clasped Jon's arms and he leaned in to press a light kiss to her cheek. Behind her, the southern envoy stood, observing. Sansa gestured gracefully. Jon, these are the representatives from King's Landing, Ser Martin Dannet, Maester Joran, and Lady Zelera of House Royce by marriage. They travel in the name of the Iron Throne. Jon looked them over. Ser Martin was a lean knight with a neatly trimmed beard, his posture rigid. Maester Joran wore the heavy chain of a maester, though he carried himself more like a court official with a brisk air of self-importance. Lady Zelera appeared to be in her early 30s, wrapped in a rich burgundy cloak, a faintly curious expression on her face. House Royce was of the Vale, so perhaps she was well-traveled enough not to be entirely shocked by northern or free-folk customs. Jon offered a polite nod, which they returned. Then Sansa gestured to Tormund, Val, and Owen, introducing them. Tormund gave a half-bow that looked more like a nod, Val inclined her head graciously, and Owen gave a more traditionally polite bow. The southern trio seemed to register mild surprise at being greeted by free folk leaders, but they hid it quickly. Sansa invited them all to sit, indicating chairs arranged around a rectangular table near the hearth. Ghost sat himself near Jon's chair, ears pricked. A steward poured wine and water, setting out a plate of bread, cheese, and dried meats. Once everyone was settled, Sansa nodded to Jon. He understood that she wanted him to open the discussion as the man behind this new kingdom. Clearing his throat, he addressed the Iron Throne envoys. "Welcome to the north," he said, voice steady. "I understand you've come a long way to see what we've built at Snow's Hold, and perhaps to learn what it means for the realm." Ser Martin Dannet inclined his head. "Lord Snow, or is it King Snow now? We've heard conflicting titles." Tormund leaned forward, a faint growl in his throat, but Jon raised a hand to calm him. "I hold no royal title. What we have in the north is an agreement between the free folk, once called wildlings, and the north under Queen Sansa's guidance. We've established a settlement beyond the wall where these people can live in peace, recognized as free by those of us who share their borders. We call it the New Kingdom out of convenience, but it's not a kingdom in the traditional sense. I do not sit on a throne." Sansa added, "The north supports Snow's Hold as a partner, an ally, and a refuge. It has grown quickly, with people from both sides of the wall and some from further south seeking a new start. They abide by certain laws, just as we do, and pay tribute in trade goods. We find it mutually beneficial." Maester Joran rested his elbows on the table, folding his fingers. "The crown, as you might expect, is curious. The last we knew, the free folk were considered outside the laws of the 7 kingdoms, living beyond the wall. Now we hear tales of a large settlement that includes folk from the southern regions as well. Some have begun to call it a haven for outlaws or a potential seat of rebellion." Owen Blackwood spoke up then, quietly but firmly. "With respect, that is the talk of fearmongers. I've seen Snow's Hold myself. I live there. It is no seat of rebellion, but a place of hope. Many who come only seek to escape the ravages of war or the heavy burdens of southern politics. They find freedom, yes, but also responsibility. We do not harbor criminals. We have laws different from those of King's Landing, but laws nonetheless." Val's gaze flicked to each envoy in turn. "Long ago, you people built a wall to keep out the free folk. You thought of savages, thieves, raiders? And yes, we fought you because we were labeled as enemies. But we bled side by side when the real enemy came. Now we live in peace with the North. Perhaps it's time the Iron Throne recognized that peace as well, instead of clinging to old myths." Ser Martin pursed his lips, clearly unused to a woman speaking so boldly. But Lady Zelera nodded, her eyes narrowing with interest. We've heard partial accounts of the war against the dead and the role the free folk played, but so many in the south were sheltered from that threat. They only saw the aftermath or heard second-hand stories. She paused, looking thoughtful. If what you say is true, that you're building a lawful settlement, then there is room for negotiation. The crown does not desire fresh conflict, but it does have concerns about a domain that sits beyond its recognized borders yet draws subjects away without oversight. Sansa's voice was cool, precise. The people who leave do so by choice. We do not recruit or encourage desertion. If the southern lords treated their small folk well, fewer might seek refuge so far north. But that is not our doing. Maester Joran took a measured breath. Let us be practical. The crown might be persuaded to acknowledge this new settlement if it received certain assurances. For instance, an understanding of taxes or trade routes, or a pledge of non-aggression in writing. If you truly do not seek rebellion, perhaps you might formalize your status as a protectorate of the north or even of the realm. Tormund snorted. We bend no knee to the south. Jon placed a restraining hand on Tormund's arm. We understand that the crown might want proof we're not building an army. But no matter the name, protectorate, ally, or free partner, we are not going to be subjugated to the whims of King's Landing. We have no intention of fighting the south, but neither will we allow others to dictate how we live. Ser Martin's gaze flicked to Sansa. Queen in the north, you once declared independence from the Iron Throne. Now you harbor another settlement that does the same. How does the crown remain assured that you will not continue to encourage fragmentation of the realm? Sansa's chin lifted with regal poise. The north left the Seven Kingdoms due to grave injustices and betrayals from the south. But we have not waged war upon your realm since. We have rebuilt. We trade with those who wish to trade. Snow's Hold is not a puppet state, it's a unique community that ensures stability beyond the wall. If anything, it secures your northernmost border from chaos. Maester Joran and Lady Zelera exchanged glances. Something unspoken passed between them. Then Lady Zelera sat forward. We should see the settlement for ourselves. A few of us at least. That might alleviate certain fears in King's Landing, or at least grant us an accurate report. Would you allow an envoy to travel to Snow's Hold and see it firsthand? Jon felt Tormund's tension ease slightly. An inspection was better than an outright demand. He glanced at Sansa, who gave him a small nod. I can accommodate that, Jon replied. You'll be under our protection. You'll see the truth of what we've built. But be warned, the journey isn't comfortable and the free folk aren't known for kowtowing to outsiders. Lady Zelera smiled faintly. I've traveled many roads, Lord Snow. I can handle discomfort if it means clarity. Jon studied the three envoys. Ser Martin looked hesitant, perhaps worried about leaving the safe walls of Winterfell. Maester Joran seemed to consider the matter more academically. Lady Zelera appeared the most open-minded. He decided to propose a compromise. Let one or two of you come north with a small escort, no more than half a dozen. We can spare accommodations for that many. You'll witness our daily life, our laws, and perhaps talk to the settlers themselves. Then you can return to Winterfell or King's Landing and report your findings. The rest of you can remain with Queen Sansa or return south, whichever you prefer. Ser Martin Dannet coughed. Such a trip might be hazardous. The crown cannot afford to lose its envoys to northern bandits or worse. Tormund bristled. Bandits? You're more likely to be robbed on the King's Road than by the folk near Snow's Hold. We keep them in check. And if you want safety, you have to trust our protection. Jon added calmly, if your retinue is too large, it'll raise suspicion among the free folk. They'll think you're a scouting force for an invasion. This must be done carefully in the spirit of goodwill. Or not at all. Lady Zelera regarded Ser Martin with a pointed look. I volunteer to go. Ser Martin, perhaps you and the Maester can remain at Winterfell to handle any formal negotiations with Queen Sansa. I can handle a fact-finding mission. I am no stranger to travel, as I mentioned, and my presence might reassure the crown that a lady of good standing personally witnessed the settlement. Ser Martin exhaled, glancing at Maester Joran, who offered a small shrug, as if to say he had no desire to ride into the wilderness. Very well, the knight said. We'll remain to finalize the details with Queen Sansa, pending Lady Zelera's report. Jon nodded, relieved. This arrangement seemed workable, though not without its challenges. Val seemed mildly pleased, and Tormund exhaled through his nose, possibly relieved they wouldn't have to host too many Southron visitors. Sansa spoke next, her voice warm yet authoritative. Then it's settled. You'll be our guest tonight, Lady Zelera. and tomorrow you can ride with Jon and his party back to Snow's Hold. Ser Martin, Maester Joran, you will stay here as my honored guests while we negotiate a formal statement on the Crown's attitude toward the settlement. I promise you full transparency in what we can offer." The envoy members murmured agreement. The tension in the air receded slightly. Sansa rose, ending the audience with a gracious invitation for them to rest and dine later in the Great Hall. The envoys bowed and withdrew, accompanied by northern stewards. Lord Glover, Lady Mormont's cousin, and Lord Serwyn also excused themselves, eager perhaps to discuss the day's developments among themselves. That left Sansa, Jon, Tormund, Val, and Owen in the hall, with Ghost sitting alert at Jon's side. The door closed, leaving them in a hush broken only by the crackle of the hearth. Sansa stepped forward, letting out a soft sigh. "You handled that well, Jon. They came in with a more aggressive stance initially, but I see the presence of Tormund and Val gave them pause. Reminded them this is real, not just a rumor." Tormund chuckled. "Real as my fists. So now we get to show them the joys of the road and the cold nights. That's better than sitting in a stuffy castle, anyway." Val arched a brow. "We'll have to ensure Lady Zelera sees what we want her to see, and not the troubles we keep under wraps. That includes the Black Dagger Riders. If she witnesses any sign of them harassing travelers, it might confirm the Crown's worst fears, if they mistake those men for part of our forces." Jon ran a hand along Ghost's neck, thinking, "We'll have to be cautious but honest. Lady Zelera seems level-headed. If we hide things and she uncovers the truth, it'll harm our credibility. Better to show her we're confronting these issues head-on, that we don't tolerate lawlessness." Sansa nodded in agreement. "You'll have to manage it carefully, then. I'll do my best with the other two envoys here, shaping the official narrative. If all goes well, the Crown might settle for a form of recognition that allows you to exist without paying heavy taxes or risking invasion. If they see you as a strategic ally rather than a rogue state, it could be enough." Tormund clapped his hands. "We'll make them see. And if not, well, they'll have to taste a bit of northern steel." Owen Blackwood smiled wryly. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Swords have spilled enough blood already." Jon placed a hand on Owen's shoulder, glad for his calm perspective. Then he met Sansa's eyes. "I appreciate all you've done. I know you have your own realm to govern. Standing by us like this, it means everything." She placed a cool hand atop his. "You're my brother, Jon. I'll always stand by you and by those who fight for a just cause. I only wish we could have saved more souls during the wars, but perhaps we can save a few more now by forging a better future." They parted on that hopeful note. Jon led Tormund, Val, and Owen to the quarters Sansa had arranged for them. After freshening up and changing clothes, Tormund under much protest at wearing something less ragged, they joined the evening feast in the Great Hall. The envoys were present along with various northern lords and ladies. Ser Martin seemed stiff and formal, exchanging polite words with Glover. Maester Joran took notes, occasionally asking questions about the growth of Winterfell's population. Lady Zelera appeared more at ease, sampling northern dishes with genuine curiosity, remarking on how she found the spices different from those used in King's Landing or the Vale. Jon didn't linger in conversation with the envoys. He let Sansa handle most of it, trusting her polished courtesy. Instead, he found himself seated near Tormund and a few minor northern lords who regaled each other with old war stories. The feast passed without incident. Before long, Lady Zelera announced she would retire early to prepare for the journey. Jon gave her a courteous bow, promising they would depart at first light. When at last the hall began to empty, Sansa beckoned Jon aside. She pressed into his hand a small sealed packet of letters. "These are copies of everything I've documented regarding the settlement, supply inventories, the signatories of your council, and other evidence of how you govern. In case Lady Zelera wants something official. It might impress her that you keep thorough records." Jon smiled. "Thank you. I'll use them if needed." They said goodnight. Jon spent the rest of the evening wandering the familiar corridors of Winterfell, memories tugging at every corner. He passed the old training yard where he once sparred with Robb, the stables where Arya hid away from Septa Mordane, the corridors where he'd felt so invisible as a bastard. It all felt both distant and comforting now. Change had swept through these walls, some scars from the wars remained, some new banners hung. But the heart of Winterfell lived on. He found a quiet corner of the Godwood before turning in, kneeling by the weirwood tree. Its carved face regarded him with ancient, unreadable eyes. He laid a hand against the trunk, recalling the countless times Ned Stark must have prayed here. Jon's thoughts turned to the father who raised him, to Ygritte and all he had lost, and to the fragile dream he now guarded. He could almost sense a faint whisper through the leaves, though whether it was the old gods or merely the wind, he did not know. He whispered, "Give me strength to protect them. Let the South Sea reason, or let me have the courage to do what's needed if they don't." The leaves rustled. The night air brushed his cheek. Ghost stood at the edge of the clearing, watchful. Jon rose, feeling a somber kind of peace settle over him. Then he returned inside, found his bed in the same tower room he used to occupy as a boy, and settled into a dreamless sleep. Dawn came, heralded by pale light slanting through the narrow window. Jon dressed quickly. He joined Tormund, Val, Owen, and Lady Zelera in the courtyard. She wore a more practical riding outfit now, dark trousers, a fitted leather jerkin, and a burgundy cloak. A small retinue of 4 soldiers from King's Landing accompanied her, wearing matching surcoats with the crown's sigil. Sansa was there to see them off, along with a handful of northern lords who offered stiff goodbyes. Sansa embraced Jon lightly. "Send word if trouble arises. I'll handle Ser Martin and Maester Joran here. If all goes well, we'll have a working agreement by the time you return." Jon squeezed her hand, gratitude written plainly on his face. Then he mounted his horse. The others did the same. Lady Zelara's retinue bore spears and swords, though they were traveling in a small enough group not to look threatening. Sansa nodded solemnly, stepping back as the gates were opened. With a final glance at his sister, Jon led them out, Ghost loping at his side. The ride toward Snow's Hold took them along the same route Jon's party had traveled, though now accompanied by Lady Zelara's guard. She asked many questions along the way about how the settlement was organized, how the free folk lived, whether the children were taught to read, and so on. Jon answered patiently, sometimes deferring to Tormund or Val. Lady Zelera seemed genuinely interested in learning. Her guards remained tense, scanning the horizon as if expecting an ambush from wild savages. Tormund took great delight in teasing them, telling outlandish tales of man-eating giants. Val smirked at his side, and Owen tried to balance the conversation by offering more factual commentary. They camped at the same spot near the creek the first night. Lady Zelara's guards made a visible perimeter with torches, ensuring no threat could sneak up. Tormund shook his head in mild scorn but said nothing. They passed a relatively peaceful night, broken only by the distant howling of wolves. Zelera seemed unsettled by the sounds, but Jon reassured her that Ghost would detect any real danger. The next morning, they rode at a steady pace. The conversation died down as the travelers saved their energy for the journey ahead. By midday, dark clouds swept in from the west, bringing a light rain that slicked the road and drenched their cloaks. Lady Zelara's soldiers muttered curses about the northern weather, while Tormund hummed a jaunty tune, seemingly unbothered. Jon noted how the southern guards flinched at every rustle in the underbrush, a testament to how little they knew these lands. He hoped they wouldn't prove too jumpy if they encountered wildlife or stray travelers. In the late afternoon, the sun broke through again, revealing the rugged expanse of territory that led to Snow's Hold. Soon they passed the first sign of the settlement's influence, a small outpost manned by 2 free folk archers and a northern scout. A crude banner of the mammoth wolf sigil hung from a wooden pike. The outpost was little more than a raised platform with a partial roof, but it served as an early warning station. The watchers hailed Jon's party, saluting them. Lady Zelara's curiosity kindled anew. "Such outposts, are they common?" she asked Jon, shading her eyes against the sun. "We've built a few, along key routes," Jon explained. "Our domain is small, but we want travelers to know they're getting close. We also want to deter bandits. A small presence can make a big difference." Zelera nodded in approval. "It seems organized." They continued. By sunset of the second day, the walls of Snow's Hold came into view. At first, it appeared as a wooden palisade rising from the rolling land, overshadowed by the distant forest. But as they drew closer, Lady Zelera could see the stone buttresses, the half-built towers, and the patchwork of huts and cabins inside. Smoke wafted upward from dozens of hearths, and a small throng of people moved near the gate. The sight of so many furs, leathers, and varied accents must have astonished Zelera, for she pulled her horse alongside Jon and remarked, "This is larger than I imagined." Jon felt a ripple of pride. "We're growing." They approached the gate, guarded by a free folk warrior and a northern soldier side by side. The pair recognized Jon and let them pass with a respectful nod, though their eyes lingered warily on the southerners. Inside, the courtyard bustled with activity, children running, traders setting up stalls, a blacksmith hammering a new piece of iron. At the sight of the new arrivals, a hush fell over some of the crowd. Curious faces peered from windows. Tormund raised an arm. "Back to your tasks, you lazy goats," he shouted good-naturedly. "Nothing to see here, just more tall tales for tomorrow." A ripple of laughter and chatter resumed. Some bowed or nodded to Jon, a few gave Tormund friendly waves, and a couple of children rushed up to stare at the Southern Guard's polished armor. Lady Zelera's gaze swept over everything with keen interest. "It truly is a mix of South and North here," she murmured. Val dismounted, handing her reins to a stable hand. "We'll show you where you can stay," she said. "Our accommodations might be humbler than Winterfell, but you'll have a roof over your head and a proper bed." One of Zelera's guards cleared his throat. "We'd like to inspect the quarters for security, my lady." Zelera shot him a sideways look but nodded. "Of course." Jon tried not to bristle. They would learn soon enough that such concerns were mostly unnecessary, but he understood their caution. After all, the stories of wildlings as vicious raiders had circulated for generations in the south. He led them through the gate yard, pointing out various structures. The keep rose before them, a patchwork of stone blocks and freshly hewn timbers. Work was still in progress on one of the upper towers, scaffolding clinging to the walls. A training yard adjoined the main building, and the clang of steel indicated practice was underway. Nearby, a large open space served as a communal area where stalls sold goods, furs, bread, carved bone trinkets, fish caught from northern rivers. Lady Zelera's expression shifted from guarded curiosity to guarded admiration. "You've accomplished much in a short time. How many souls live here?" Owen Blackwood, who had ridden up, answered. "Hard to say precisely. We track families as they arrive, but some come and go. Perhaps 3,000 people or more at last count, scattered in the hold and its outskirts." Zelera whistled under her breath, looking around at the bustle. "Quite a few. That's more than some southern towns. And all under your leadership, Lord Snow." Jon's lips twitched into a small smile. "Leadership is shared among many. I'm just the one who keeps the peace and ensures we have a direction." They guided Lady Zelera and her guards into the keep. Inside, a steward directed them to a wing with guest quarters. The rooms were modest, wooden walls, simple beds, furs for blankets. The guards looked somewhat dismayed at the lack of fine amenities, but Lady Zelera did not complain. She calmly thanked the steward, then turned to Jon. "I'd like to rest a short while, then perhaps tour the settlement this evening, if that's amenable?" "Of course," Jon said. "I'll have Tormund or Val show you around. You can meet the council and see how we settle disputes. Whenever you wish to begin, just say the word." She dipped her head. "Thank you, Lord Snow." Once she was settled, Jon, Tormund, Val, and Owen gathered in the main hall, which served as both council chamber and communal dining space. Maester Joss was there, anxiously awaiting news of the negotiations. Jon filled him in, explaining that they would host Lady Zelera for a while, hopefully persuading her that the settlement was not a threat. The Maester nodded, saying he'd gather any documents she might wish to see. Val, arms folded, exhaled. "We'll need to keep an eye on them. Not because they'll betray us necessarily, but because we don't want them jumping to the wrong conclusion about anything they see. There are still corners of the settlement where tensions flare." Jon rubbed his jaw. Indeed, in a growing community of thousands, there were bound to be disputes. Some free folk disliked the expansion of farmland. Some northerners were wary of certain free folk customs. And then there were new arrivals from the south, bringing their own conflicts. More recently, the breakaway group of free folk who refused any alliance had been rumored to lurk on the fringes, occasionally stealing livestock or harassing travelers. If Lady Zelera witnessed something like that, she might carry home an unfavorable impression. Tormund shrugged, as if reading Jon's thoughts. "We'll show her the best of what we have to offer, but we can't hide everything. Besides, maybe it's good for her to see that we face problems like anyone else. Real communities have squabbles, not just sugar and roses." "True enough," Jon said. "We'll be honest about our struggles, but we can demonstrate how we handle them fairly. Let's start by giving her a basic tour, show her the farmland, the training yard, the storehouses. Then she can attend a council meeting. After that, if she wishes to speak to people on her own, we'll let her." As they were discussing the itinerary, one of the free folk rangers burst in, breathless. His face was streaked with sweat, eyes wild. "Lord," he said to Jon in a rush, "we found another family on the western road. They'd been attacked. The father's dead, the mother wounded. Children are missing." Jon's stomach clenched. Was it the same Black Dagger group? The ranger nodded grimly. They didn't see them closely, but they described the Black Dagger on their surcoats. They took supplies and left the mother for dead, so it seems. Tormund swore under his breath. Val's face tightened. Owen let out a soft hiss of sympathy. Jon's mind raced. This was exactly the kind of thing they feared Lady Zelera would discover. But more than that, it enraged him that innocent travelers had been attacked. He had to respond. He turned to the ranger. "Where is the mother now?" "She's alive, but barely. We carried her back to the outpost. She needs the healer's care. We still haven't found the children." Jon nodded, forcing himself to remain calm. "We'll send a search party immediately to find the children, if they're alive, and we'll hunt these riders. We can't allow them to terrorize people on our doorstep." Tormund grinned fiercely, a wolfish spark in his eye. "I'll gather some fighters. We'll ride out at first light." Val laid a hand on Tormund's shoulder. "I'll go too. We can't let them keep doing this." But Jon hesitated. If Tormund and Val left in force, who would help manage Lady Zelera's visit? Owen alone? This was a precarious moment politically, but equally precarious in terms of morality. The missing children were paramount. He realized he might have no choice but to trust Owen and perhaps some of the other council members to keep Lady Zelera occupied. He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling. "Go," he told Tormund and Val. "Take a squad of your best. But be careful. We don't know if these men have a larger force. Rescue the children if you can, and if you find the Black Dagger riders, bring them to justice. Alive if possible, but do what you must." Tormund nodded. "Aye, I will." Val's expression was grim. "We'll return with good news, or not at all." They turned to leave. Jon caught Tormund's arm. "Send a raven once you have any news. I'll do my best here." With that, Tormund and Val departed in a flurry of preparation. Jon sent word to the stable master to ready enough horses for a troop of 10. He then tasked a pair of healers to go to the outpost and tend the wounded mother. Anger simmered beneath his calm exterior. He had hoped to deal with the Black Dagger riders quietly, but now their violence was escalating. This was precisely what could undermine Snowshold's image of stability. By the time Jon emerged from coordinating logistics, dusk had fallen. Torches were lit in the courtyard, and a soft glow spilled from windows. Lady Zelera was standing near the keep's entrance, gazing out at the settlement. A couple of her guards hovered close, but she waved them back as Jon approached. "Lord Snow," she said, a gentle inquiry in her voice. "I overheard rumors of some trouble on the western road. Are you sending out a rescue party?" Jon nodded. "No point hiding it." "Yes. A family was attacked by bandits. We believe it's the same group we've been tracking for a while now. They wear a Black Dagger on their surcoats. They harass travelers trying to reach Snow's Hold." Zelera studied him, concern etching her brow. "Do you suspect they're in league with anyone in your settlement?" Jon shook his head firmly. "No. They're outlaws. Possibly hired by someone who wants to undermine us, or just cruel opportunists. Either way, they don't represent us. We're doing everything we can to stop them." Zelera's gaze swept the courtyard, where people were beginning to gather for evening meals or gatherings. "You have your share of challenges, it seems. Yet I see how these people work together. It reminds me of some frontier towns I've visited in the Vale, harsh conditions, but a strong sense of community. I'd like to see more tomorrow if that's acceptable." "Of course," Jon said. "I'm sorry I can't accompany you this evening. There's much I need to arrange. But Owen Blackwood can show you around. He's from an old northern house and knows every corner of this place." She nodded. "I'll take you up on that offer." True to his word, Jon found Owen and asked him to escort Lady Zelera. The two departed into the settlement, likely to see the communal fires where free folk danced under the stars or the storehouses where night shift guards kept watch. Meanwhile, Jon spent much of the evening in the council chamber, meeting with various elders. They strategized how to handle the Black Dagger threat, ensuring that all travel routes were patrolled. He only managed to retire late in the night, bone-weary and haunted by the image of the wounded mother, the missing children. The next few days followed a tense pattern. Lady Zelera continued her observations of Snow's Hold, speaking with settlers from different backgrounds. She attended a council session where Jon presided over a dispute between a northern farmer and a free folk trapper. She seemed quietly impressed by the straightforward, if informal, justice system. Jon listened, asked questions, and then proposed a compromise that both parties reluctantly accepted. She also visited the farmland outside the walls, where she saw the difficulty of growing crops in such a harsh climate. Yet the families out there spoke of hope and independence, how they valued forging their own path. All the while, news from Tormund and Val trickled in via messenger or raven. They had found tracks suggesting the Blackdagger riders were holed up in a ruined tower deep in the forest. Skirmishes ensued. They managed to rescue one of the missing children, a wide-eyed boy who had been left half-starved in a makeshift camp. Tragically, the father had indeed been murdered and the mother remained on the brink of death despite the healer's efforts. Tormund's letters raged about the cruelty of these men. They were not just bandits, they seemed bent on terrorizing travelers specifically heading to Snow's Hold. Jon kept Lady Zelera informed in broad strokes, emphasizing that the settlement was actively hunting these outlaws to protect innocents. She asked him pointed questions: why these riders targeted Snow's Hold, what their motivations might be, whether there was a chance a southern lord was pulling the strings. Jon could only speculate. He suspected either a disgruntled northern lord who opposed the settlement or a southern party wanting to sabotage them. But with no proof, it remained an ugly mystery. Despite the shadow cast by this violence, Lady Zelera's time at Snow's Hold seemed to open her eyes to the settlement's reality. She conversed with mothers who taught their children both the runes of the free folk and the common tongue. She observed the training yard where free folk warriors sparred side by side with Northmen. She wandered the market stalls, tasting a stew made from northern roots and salted fish. She even listened to a local bard, a traveling singer from the Riverlands who had found a home here, perform a ballad mixing southern tunes with free folk chants. Through it all, she maintained her composure, though Jon noticed moments of genuine surprise when she encountered a piece of culture she'd never imagined. One evening, she joined Jon at a communal fire pit, where a few families sat cooking late suppers. The flames danced shadows across everyone's faces. A hushed lull in conversation followed her arrival, but Jon introduced her as a visitor seeking to learn about the settlement. An older free folk woman began telling stories of the long night, of how the free folk and the northerners fought side by side. Lady Zelera listened intently. When the story ended, the old woman fixed Zelera with a sharp gaze and said, "We want no trouble from the south. All we ask is to be left in peace to live our lives. If the crown tries to shackle us again, well, we'll fight before we kneel." Zelera's expression was thoughtful, not dismissive. "I see that strength in you, and I believe your desire for peace is real. I hope the crown can understand that." She glanced at Jon. "Lord Snow, you've done something remarkable here, turning old enemies into neighbors. Perhaps that's worth protecting." Jon felt a subtle flicker of relief. She was seeing their truth. But the question remained, what would she report back, and would the crown actually listen? A few more days passed. Tormund's group still roamed the forest, drawing ever closer to the Blackdagger riders. The mother of the missing children succumbed to her wounds, leaving only the fatherless boy alive. Jon felt the sting of that loss acutely, as did many in the settlement. Lady Zelera offered her condolences upon hearing the news. She also expressed concern that such an incident might happen again unless the outlaws were rooted out completely. Jon agreed wholeheartedly. At last, one morning, news arrived that Tormund and Val had cornered the Blackdagger men in a ravine near the forest's edge, resulting in a fierce fight. Several outlaws were killed, a few captured, and the remainder fled deeper into the wilderness. Tormund's message said they believed the group had lost its leadership and might scatter, but one captive, under questioning, had given cryptic hints that they'd been paid to disrupt travel to Snow's Hold. No names were mentioned, only that the paymaster came from south of the Neck and preferred to remain anonymous. It was maddeningly vague, but it confirmed Jon's suspicion that a larger plot could be in play. Lady Zelera listened to this update in Jon's council chamber. So it seems they were hired to sow chaos. Perhaps a lord who fears the exodus of small folk, or an enemy of Queen Sansa who wants to weaken the North's new ally. In either case, it suggests that not everyone in the realm supports your settlement. Jon placed his palms on the table, leaning forward. "We knew that. Still, if you report to the crown that we do our best to protect people and punish such crimes, maybe that will deter any official meddling. We can't control secret conspiracies, but at least we can show we're no threat to the realm." She tapped a finger on the table. "I will indeed report that. Though, if this was funded by a southern lord, The crown has reason to intervene on your side, ideally if the monarchy truly wants peace. I can't promise how they'll react, but I won't conceal these events. Jon closed his eyes for a moment. The prospect of further political intrigue weighed heavily, but better some truth than a wave of rumors. I appreciate your honesty, Lady Zelera. Will you be returning soon? She glanced at the courtyard outside, where her guards waited near their horses. I believe I've seen enough to make a thorough report. I should rejoin Ser Martin and Maester Joran at Winterfell. Then, presumably, we'll travel to King's Landing to present our findings to the crown. She paused. I'd like to speak with you privately before I go. Jon nodded. He dismissed the few council members present, leaving only Ghost in the room with them. Lady Zelera settled into a chair, resting her hands in her lap. She seemed poised, yet something in her eyes suggested a deeper layer of emotion. Lord Snow, she began quietly, I've traveled to many corners of the realm, and I've seen all manner of communities, from the grand to the squalid. What you've built here, it feels like a fragile miracle. You have your share of problems, culture clashes, outlaws, resource limitations. But I also see a shared purpose that's rare in Westeros. It would be a tragedy for the crown to stamp this out from ignorance or fear. He met her gaze. I agree. That's why I'm counting on your fair report. She offered a small, wry smile. And you shall have it. But politics in the Red Keep can be treacherous. Even the best words can be twisted. Still, I'll do what I can. The truth is, you're not seeking to undermine the realm. If anything, you're building a bulwark against chaos beyond the wall. That should be recognized as beneficial. But we must also consider that some southern lords may see your realm as a threat to their labor force or an insult to the old feudal order. They might clamor for the crown to bring you to heel. Jon clenched his fists, then relaxed them. I won't kneel. Not to the Iron Throne. But I'll sign treaties for trade or vow non-aggression. I'll do anything short of handing these people back into the hands of those who would exploit them. I believe you, she said softly. And I suspect King's Landing may accept a compromise if the monarchy sees tangible benefits like mutual defense treaties or a promise of open trade routes. It's the only way to quell the paranoia that you're a rebellious domain. He nodded. We can discuss that with Sansa, too. The North is our primary ally. If the crown is wise, it'll see that working with us is better than forcing conflict. She stood, smoothing her cloak. I'll leave on the morrow, then. Ser Martin and Maester Joran will have their own opinions, but I suspect they'll heed my account. Thank you for hosting me. I know it was an inconvenience, especially given the troubles with those outlaws. Jon inclined his head. Thank you for coming with an open mind. If you or the crown ever wish to send another envoy, we'll welcome them, provided they come peacefully. She extended a hand which Jon clasped briefly in farewell. Then she departed, her cloak trailing behind her like a banner. Jon sank back into his chair, exhaling a long breath. The visit had gone as well as he could have hoped, though there were no guarantees. Everything now depended on how the Iron Throne weighed the testimony of these envoys against the fears of those who opposed the new kingdom. The next day, Lady Zelera and her guards departed Snow's Hold, escorted by Owen Blackwood and a few riders to ensure her safety at least until she neared Winterfell. Jon stood on the walls to watch them leave. The gates swung shut behind them. He felt an odd mixture of relief and anxiety, as though the first act of a grand play had concluded, leaving him uncertain about the final outcome. In the days that followed, Tormund and Val returned from their campaign against the Blackdagger outlaws. They brought with them 2 captive riders, beaten, sullen men who refused to speak more of their paymaster. One had a broken arm, the other a host of bruises. Jon questioned them personally, employing stern but not cruel methods. They simply glared, spitting at times, cursing him. They hurled insults at the free folk and laughed when asked who had paid them. One eventually muttered something about the South, but no details. Jon had no choice but to sentence them to labor in a remote outpost under guard, hoping that in time they might reveal more or at least realize the futility of their silence. Tormund reported that the remaining outlaws had scattered, unlikely to regroup anytime soon. But the damage had been done. More innocent blood spilled, fueling Jon's determination to solidify the Hold's defenses and ensure the roads were patrolled regularly. He prayed that Lady Zelera would convey the truth to King's Landing, that these outlaws were not the settlement's doing, but its enemy. Summer's days began to shorten, the sky losing a fraction of its brightness with each passing dawn. Preparations for winter started anew, with people stocking cellars, smoking meats, and shoring up homes. The cycle would continue, just as the people of the north had always done. But now they did it together, northerners and free folk, forging a destiny that lay beyond old divisions. Ravens from Winterfell brought sporadic updates. Sansa wrote that Ser Martin and Maester Jorah had departed with Lady Zelera, promising to deliver a full report to King's Landing. She believed they were at least partially convinced that Snow's Hold was no immediate threat, but the final decision would lie with the crown. Another letter mentioned that Harold Slate, that troublesome minor lord, had been stirring talk of rising taxes for any supplies going north, though Sansa was working to block him. Jon's frustration with Slate mounted, but there was little he could do from afar. As the settlement braced for the cold, Jon found himself up earlier and retiring later, ensuring every storehouse was filled, every dispute addressed. He often joined the hunts himself, venturing into the forest with Tormund or Val, bringing back elk or boar to add to the communal larders. The need for meat and hides was great. Fresh arrivals kept trickling in, seeking refuge before the next winter. Some brought children, some came alone. A handful arrived with wagons of southern goods, hoping to trade. The settlement's population swelled, which thrilled Jon on one hand, but worried him on the other. More mouths to feed, more potential points of conflict. Yet despite these challenges, hope abided in the daily rhythms of life. Children learned their letters in a small schoolhouse run by an old steward from White Harbor. Couples from different backgrounds wed under the open sky, forging new families that blended the ways of the North and the free folk. Smithies rang with the clamor of forging tools, constructing plow blades and nails for building. In the evenings, people gathered around fires to share stories of the war against the dead, or to laugh at Tormund's bawdy jokes, or to dance to the lively tunes of traveling minstrels. On one such evening, Jon found himself standing on the keep's parapet, gazing down at the courtyard. Torchlight illuminated a group of men and women dancing in a circle, hands linked. The music was a blend of a northern reel and a free folk chant, the melody weaving in and out like a living tapestry of sound. Children squealed with delight, darting in and out of the dancers' path. Ghost sat at Jon's side, head up, ears perked as if he, too, listened to the music. Jon's breath misted in the cool night air. He recalled a time when all he knew was duty, whether as a bastard child in Winterfell or a sworn brother of the Night's Watch or a reluctant king in the north. Now he felt something more than duty. He felt pride and belonging. These people had chosen to shape a new destiny, and they trusted him to guide them. He vowed silently that he would never betray that trust, no matter what threats came from the south or beyond. A faint sound of footsteps on the stone made him turn. It was Maester Joss, a scroll in his hand. The maester bowed his head respectfully. "A raven arrived from Winterfell, my lord. It seems urgent." Jon unrolled the scroll, scanning Sansa's neat handwriting by the torch fixed to the battlement. His eyes flicked across the words, tension gripping him. King's Landing had responded to the envoy's report. The crown desired a formal alliance, specifying terms that included mutual trade and a declaration of non-aggression. They also hinted at the possibility of dispatching a small garrison to Snow's Hold purely for the sake of fostering cooperation. Jon felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. A garrison from King's Landing? That might be the first step toward control, a wedge to place watchers within his walls. The letter noted that the crown's tone was polite but insistent. They wanted a reply within a certain time frame, or they might consider sending a larger delegation, possibly armed. Sansa did not order Jon to comply, but she advised caution. She wrote that she was gathering northern lords to discuss the ramifications. The letter ended on a note of sisterly concern. "Choose wisely, Jon. This could be an olive branch, or it could be a chain." Jon closed his eyes, the music from below drifting up in eerie contrast to the tension in his chest. A garrison in Snow's Hold? He would never accept soldiers from King's Landing policing his people. But refusing outright might be taken as an insult or even a provocation. Could he propose an alternative, like a rotating group of observers, not permanent troops? Or perhaps a trade mission that set up a warehouse rather than a barracks? He swallowed against the dryness in his throat, remembering how quickly matters in King's Landing could escalate. If the crown truly decided to subdue the settlement, thousands of lives would be at risk. He turned to Maester Joss, voice quiet. "Thank you. Summon the council at first light. We have a decision to make." The maester nodded, retreating. Jon lingered there on the parapet, the torch crackling beside him. Below, the dance continued in a swirl of color and laughter, oblivious to the fresh threat from the south. He wondered how many times the people of Westeros had prayed for peace, only to see war return. He had fought too many battles already. If a sword had to be drawn again, so be it, but only as the last resort. He stared into the night sky, searching for any sign of guidance among the stars. There was none, only the silent twinkle of far-off lights. Behind him, Ghost stirred, pressing his muzzle against Jon's hand. Jon stroked the direwolf's fur, grounding himself in that moment. These people needed him. They needed him to find a path that preserved their freedom without inviting destruction. He turned his attention back to the dancers below, letting the music fill his ears and soothe his heart for just a moment longer. Soon, he would have to face another round of negotiations, another delicate dance with the crown. But for now, in this fleeting instant, he held onto the faint glow of camaraderie and hope that Snow's hold embodied. It was that hope he vowed to defend, come what may.